job to make.
I hope this does not become permanent.
You talked to Michelle.
Michelle?
Dang her, she's going to get her daughter at the airport. I think she was supposed to fly in about 5:30. Either, right?
Some concepts,
Excited.
some staging, some this. This last year, the one no, this one here is interesting.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, up you, right, yeah, for sure. Well, I bet better for you down there than for me down here.
Well, it doesn't matter, you're gonna get it anyway.
But one day I'm gonna get it, I'm sure.
Literally, without even the drive that side, so we're going way along. You know, there's a field between Plainford and sweeping out of the Plainford. And when it hit the Plainford,
Is that?
Yeah.
We'd like to welcome everyone to South Weaver City Council meeting tonight. It's February the 6th, 8th, and it's 6 o'clock. That's where we got the 6th. We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance from Councilwoman Petty, and then we'll have a prayer by Councilman Soderquist.
Right, repeat after me.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item we'll have tonight, it will be our, oh geez, I'm sorry. Oh, that's good.
Our dear Father, and we thank you for the opportunity to meet this evening. Grateful for this beautiful and wonderful city that we're a part of. Grateful for the opportunity we have to serve and to work together. We pray for thy Spirit to be here, that we will be able to communicate and understand each other and the items that are before us, and make wise decisions that will help keep our community and residents safe and build things for the future. We're grateful for the men and women of the services that are supporting and helping and protecting. Please continue to watch over them and all that they are doing for us. And we pray for these things now in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Gwen, that's trying to move things along here, but certainly don't want to overlook the prayer. That's probably the most important part here. Okay, let's begin then with our public comments. If you have some comments that you'd like to make, we'd ask you to please step up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes or less. We'd like to have you state your name and address and direct your comments to the entire council, and the council will not respond. So we're open for public comments. Anyone? None tonight?
No.
Anyone else? Boy, just moving right along. Presentations tonight, we've got Sergeant Pope from the Davis County Sheriff's Department that is here to do his quarterly report. So we'll invite him to turn the time to him for a minute here.
Okay. All right, sorry, got here a little bit later than I expected to. So I have 5 of these. Is there anyone who specifically would rather have one than others? It will be added here as well.
We can share.
We'll share one.
Share? Okay. There we go. Okay, I apologize about that. And then just have a quick one. Well, how's everyone later? Oh, waiting for that. All good?
Going good.
Mine was good as well. All around. Thank you. Okay, I'll be done in a minute to think there. Okay. All right, so this is the South Weaver Quarterly Report from November 9th on February 8th. I actually believe I have my dates off a little bit because we did extend it past one more week. So I believe it was actually November 16th to February 8th. So I apologize, I forgot to change that front title page there with the right dates.
Oh,
Looks like it's not even on. Oh, maybe I should turn it on. That might help. There we go. Okay. So I'm Sergeant Pope. I've been in EMS for 20 years. I've been a paramedic for that. I've been at the sheriff's office for 15 years, and I've been assigned to South Weaver. Been doing this for at least, I think, almost 4 years now in South Weaver, and I really enjoy it. If you can click that South Weaver stats there. These are the stats for the past quarter, 3 months. Little bit small there, but as you can see, for all the weeks we calculate, our deputies will calculate how much time they spend in the city or on a call, writing tickets, whatever they end up doing. They will calculate how many hours they're there for. So as you can see, total hours for day shift are 534 for the quarter. Night shift is 431, and the weekly total is 965. So that one's not, I apologize, calculated quite correctly. The total is 965 for the entire 6 months or 3 months. So I apologize, I didn't put my calculation in there, right? So we're not doing 965 hours a week, I promise you that. But anyway, so that's our general rundown. If you can scroll down just a little bit for me. There's our average, 80.4 hours a week is our average there. We had 621 calls. 11 of those were actually arrests. 69 of those were traffic stops. 26 were radar enforcements, and 3 were DUI. 47.8% of the calls that we have listed here are actually self-initiated by the deputy themselves. The DUIs were actually pretty interesting this go around, and aren't they always? Okay, if we can close out of that and go right back to the presentation there. Okay. Oh, everyone's favorite part, the significant events. All right, so I realized on the last one, I don't have to put in addresses and things like that to try and help not give away who it was or what happened with that. But I think it's a little confusing when there's no date in there. So I did actually put a date in there, but there's just no address or anything like that on certain ones. So November 16th at 7:36 hours, DUI, here we go, vehicle collision. An off-duty Cottonwood Heights officer reported a traffic collision where a vehicle collided with a fire hydrant. The driver was reported as attempting to leave the accident scene on foot, but was stopped by that officer. They were found to be DUI and completely severed the fire hydrant from the water line. South Weaver Public Works was notified and got that one fixed. That was the first fire hydrant in this quarter that was hit, not the last. On November 17th at 9 in the morning, this one I left the address in there because it was an abandoned vehicle and it was recovered as stolen. So a blue 2008 Ford F-250 was reported as abandoned at that location on Raymond Road, which is pretty rural even for South Weaver. The vehicle had been stolen out of Woods Cross in July. Evidence was located in the vehicle, such as recent receipts from local convenience stores. Woods Cross was notified and provided with the information from the evidence, and they're going to continue to try and investigate on. It seems like there's a couple rings going around that are stealing vehicles and breaking into them. So they're going to continue to work on that. Hopefully get some leads on that one. I haven't heard back from that one, even though it's November. I apologize. I didn't get to follow up with that. On November 27th at 10:43, there was vehicle theft. A 2020 blue Honda Pilot was stolen from a home between 7 and 10:30 at night. The vehicle was in the garage with the door open. The vehicle door was actually open in the garage. So it was listed as NCIC, and I apologize again. These are ones that this past week I had a lot of busy work going on, so I didn't get to follow up on that one. I wish I could get some closure for that and find out. A lot of times we end up finding these vehicles a week or two after they've been stolen and they're abandoned somewhere else. So I apologize, wasn't able to find that one. November 29th at 3:51, had a drug possession. Deputy Barney stopped the vehicle for a traffic violation, had a canine performing the sniff. The canine indicated on the vehicle and when it was searched. The search produced illegal narcotics and paraphernalia. The 2 occupants were booked into the Davis County Jail. On December 1st at 7 o'clock, had a residential burglary. A complainant reported that someone had kicked open the front door of the garage and then proceeded to take a small number of tools. The complainant had not been at the residence in 3 days, so he was unsure of a timeline for sure, and was reporting the incident so that the sheriff's office would know about it for other homes. This residence has kind of been abandoned, and so it's only visited every now and again, but that's the complaint that we got on that one. So I'm not sure the exact cost amount that was taken. December 10th at 1:50, at a child abuse, a 12-year-old juvenile female reported fear of going home and a history of abuse by her father. School administration and Davis County detectives were involved in the interview process. Based on the interview, it was determined that no crime or child abuse had been committed. The juvenile was released to her parents, who admitted to spanking as a form of discipline. DCFS was contacted and education resources given. On December 10th at 4 in the morning, the Maverick, another DUI, Deputies responded to a caller reporting a possible DUI at the gas pumps. The driver was found to have passed out while in the driver's seat. The driver was cited and released for DUI. Drug paraphernalia and alcohol were located in the vehicle. Now, some of these you're going to notice, it says they were cited and released. A lot of that is due to COVID restrictions with the jail and certain things that we can let in and certain things we can't. I don't know if you guys saw the news that said we had 60 plus in COVID in, I think it was January. And then this last month, we were able to drop 60 COVID cases in our jail down to 3. So, you know, they're actively trying to keep those out. So a lot of these, if you see released on citation when it's a DUI or something like that, that's why. December 14th at pretty much midnight, 911 hang up. Deputies responded to a 911 hang up with reports of a gun being fired once through the ceiling. On arrival, it was discovered there was a conflict of interest. Layton Police was requested to handle the investigation. Suspect was taken to Davis on a mental health hold. Complainant remained at the scene. Two handguns were booked for safekeeping into Layton PD. We have responded to this residence a couple times as well.
Sergeant Pope, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt you, but back on that DUI at
Yes.
Maverick,
Uh-huh.
if you release them and they're drunk, does somebody come get them or do they
Yes.
just drive away as another
Yes,
DUI?
no, so legally, yeah, we don't, their vehicle is impounded and they are released to a sober family member or person that can take care of them. Same thing happened with the wreck that I had down that took out the power pole. I had to release to a family member, but yes, that we didn't just,
I assume that was the case. It just-
right, yeah, we didn't
seemed
send them
kinda
off
left
and
open.
to drive home, no. Right.
Thank you.
Have some coffee, no. On December 22nd at about midnight, another DUI. While working a DUI shift, Deputy Shelley stopped the vehicle in the South Weaver area. The driver was found to be impaired. The driver was put through a DRE, which is a drug recognition expert evaluation. It has 12 different points, tests that the deputy will do. And it includes like blood pressure, vital signs, pupil dilation, all sorts of stuff to find out what exact drug they are actually impaired by. So it's a pretty cool thing and it's very accurate. And so they did a DRE and ultimately, again, released on citation to a family member. December 27th at 1 in the afternoon, ungovernable juvenile. 16-year-old female called to report domestic violence with her stepdad and mom. On an arrival, Deputy Jepson quickly learned that the juvenile was upset at her parents for changing the locks on the doors in an effort to prevent her from bringing random boys into the house. The juvenile was confrontational and made it apparent she did not like law enforcement. Parents agreed to have a family member come pick her up. The juvenile packed her belongings and left the residence. So that's kind of stuff happens. January 14th at 11 in the morning at a trespassing and unlawful detention. The complainant / offender called to report a UPS driver trespassing by turning around in a private drive. The driver was delivering a package to a private residence that they could only access in that private drive. The complainant offender blocked the driver from leaving and was cited for unlawful detention. January 30th at 1:30 at night, a gunshot wound. 2 males were manipulating a firearm, a handgun. The firearm was stated to have discharged accidentally after it was dropped on the ground. The male that was the recipient of the wayward bullet was transported to McCady Hospital in stable condition. Detective Gardner responded with the crime lab and are assessing if there's any charges to be filed on that. February 5th at 10:30 at night, had an evade. A parole fugitive was observed at the South Weaver Maverick driving a Chevy Cavalier with a male passenger. The subject is a fugitive from patrol with several felony warrants totaling up to about $60,000. A stop was attempted, but the subject increased speed and actively evaded deputies into Weber County. Deputies did not pursue. Further action is pending additional investigation. They do have, I think, a good track on this and who it was and where they went, but I haven't heard if they've actually been able to arrest that individual as of yet. So our criminal analyst is here, Elizabeth Pinto. She was here last time as well. And she put together some of this information on the South Weaver analysis here. If you can click on the South Weaver analysis there, we'll go over that. That's the paper that I handed out to you guys. Are we able to click on that? It happens. It happens. My voice puts everyone to sleep, even myself. So, you know. You are fine. So analytics on the left, that's what Elizabeth specifically does, is she totaled 12 hours in the quarter to try and run these statistics and find out, what types of crimes are being committed in South Weber and what percentage those are, and basically how our detectives are effectively spreading out their hours. Crime Lab had 5 hours, so they were called out to come out and take pictures or collect evidence, things like that. Meetings, that's with Lieutenant Cox, about 62 hours going through meetings and trying to keep everyone apprised of all the situations that are going on. Patrol, we already talked about, had 965 hours, 306 of those were officer initiated. That's where that 47% comes in. 69 of those were traffic stops, and it does have written citations at 11, which we have found is not accurate. We did find out the problem. I know I've reported that to you a couple times, and I know it sounds like a broken record, but we did actually meet with our records department and find out what the issue was. For some reason, the system that we have, instead of us just writing a citation and it giving a number here, if you search it on this side, there's two different sides to this. If you search it on the record side, it looks for how we clear the stop. So while I'm on a traffic stop, if I say clear with citation, it'll pop a number for that. If I don't say anything, I say I'm just 10-8, I'm available, then it won't track any of that. And so over time, some of our deputies have gotten into the habit of not saying clear with citation or clear with a verbal warning or something. So no number was ever generated. We have now, as of the beginning of this month, told our deputies, no, you need to clear and give what type of clearance it was, so we're more accurate on that. So I apologize that part is not accurate. And then records is 71 hours, and that's just preparing things. That's not even for court cases. That's just preparing and sending paperwork across and reviewing all of this and sending it into NIBRS, which is a national database that they have to report all this to through FBI and things like that. So that's just 71 hours of their records, just sending in all of those. These offenses, I apologize. My eyesight is not what it once was, but I'll kind of move up here. There we go. Perfect. Oh, I love it.
Way to be on top of that.
See, now you're on it. You made up for it already. All right, so crime and offenses. Child abuse, there were 5 occurrences in the past quarter. Child neglect, there were 6. Death investigation was 1. 3 fraud, harassment and threats was 1. ICAC and enticement, that's internet crimes against children, is 1. Kidnapping 1. Missing person 1. Protective order violations 1. Residential burglaries 4. Sexual abuse of a child was 1. Theft was 1. Theft of a firearm was 1. Vehicle burglary 3. Vehicle theft 2. Weapon offense with a gun is 1. Weapon offense other is another 1. So there's some pretty serious things going on in the quarter here as well. And then this further breaks down the percentage of what is going on. The thing that kind of shocked me is in the top right corner there, you can see the child neglect. It was at 16.7% in the quarter of all calls, of all investigations in South Weber. That was 16.7%. And that just kind of shocked me a bit. Everything in the red there is persons crimes, the ones that we just kind of listed right there. And everything on the left is property crimes. And actually, this looks better than last quarter. If you remember, the red was a lot bigger than the blue. So we're actually still looking a lot better. And our call volume actually went down. The seriousness of them actually went down, even though it doesn't seem like it. The seriousness went down a little bit in this quarter as well. And I believe that should be about all that I have. And I would just want to ask you guys, is there any place or anything that we need to be concentrating on that you guys are seeing that we can improve?
What constitutes child neglect?
That could be pretty much anything from, like, we get a welfare check and say a child's out playing on the road and there's no parents around. That could be considered child neglect. Failure to provide, basically, so for their schooling or their food or anything like that, that can be child neglect. There's a few things in there that can be considered child neglect. And I believe these ones, if I remember right, looking through some of the reports, were more of welfare checks, finding that children didn't have quite the right provisions for them to succeed. So that's kind of where that comes in.
So does someone usually call in and report that, I guess?
Yes, usually. And sometimes it comes in through the school. Sometimes we're getting it from the school and it goes through DCFS and then they open up a child welfare case, and then that's kind of where that comes into.
So of the citations,
Yes,
is there a way to see how many of them are for speeding or for what type of citations they were given?
I'm sure we can. That would take, it wouldn't take a whole lot of work. I don't have that data right now, but it's something I can look into and I have your email, obviously.
Yeah,
Can send you an email if that's something you're interested in.
yeah, I'm just curious of where they're at, if it is for speeding, where
Sure.
they're getting the citations from.
Okay.
And then I have had residents contact me. I know this is kind of difficult for you guys because as soon as you're there, it stops. But Old Maple Farms and
Okay.
Kingston,
Yes.
they're blowing that
Still?
stop sign over and over. And
Okay.
he sent me like 3 different videos, they're
Uh-huh.
each like 3 minutes long, and it's just car after car blowing through that stop sign.
Okay.
Um,
What I think we can try to do with that one, what I've noticed is that usually it's on the nights that they have the soccer, right? The soccer game going on.
mhm.
So I think a solution to that could be we might get the schedule from the soccer complex and kind of find out, okay, well, these are the days we probably need to target that. And I think we can do that. I think that should be very simple. So
Okay.
I'll try to get a schedule if we can from the soccer complex. See
Great.
what we can do about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Quick one. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Good.
All right.
Okay, so I was looking at the average hours all
Yes.
throughout last year.
Yes.
And January, we were at 115.4 average. April, we dropped down to 101. July, we dropped down to 99. November, down to 94. And if I understand what you said, we
This was
did
80.
80
Mhm.
this time.
Mhm.
Why the
A lot
why
of
the decline?
A lot of that is attrition, as well as the paramedic program. The paramedics have kind of taken over in South Weaver.
Mhm.
And so we actually had 1 or 2 guys up here trying to help cover for paramedic coverage beforehand. And now that we're not doing that anywhere near as often, those hours have kind of scaled back to just one deputy being up here.
Okay. With kind of going with what Haley was saying, still the biggest complaint I hear from all citizens is still speeding. And I know we're dropping down in the hours. Is there anything that you can do to kind of pull away from some of the main streets, like South Weaver Drive, which is the only place I've seen people on, and put them back into the neighborhoods for a little while?
Yeah, if you guys have a specific road that you would like to be addressed, please send us that information, even if it's through David or, whoever you need to get that through to us so that we can know where to target. At this point, some of the guys, they come up, it's their assigned city for the day. So they come up and they're like, oh, South Weaver Drive, it's a higher speed, I'm going to hit that.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think a lot of the speeding is actually 8100 South or 2700 East or, something like that. Whereas Old Maple, whereas it's not quite as obvious.
Yeah.
So if you guys would let us know, what we have done is we told our guys, now in briefings, you will be given an assignment. So when we show up for our briefing at the beginning of our shift, we have a 15-minute briefing and then the sergeant will actually assign something. So if you guys will give us that information, that sergeant will actually assign that to that deputy for that shift. Hey, you're going to go hit this for this shift right now. So if we have that information, that will help us out immensely.
I think it'd actually be easier for us to pick a street that maybe isn't getting the massive speeding going down it.
Sure.
'Cause, right now it's all throughout the
Okay.
town. And
Okay.
then,
And I know the city pretty well, so if I
Yeah.
need to kind of send that off to our guys, then I could do that.
yeah. And I love you guys, and
Oh, yeah.
that's why I want to get more of you in town. A couple times ago, I don't know, I can't remember which one. We were talking about being able to increase the ratio of warnings versus tickets,
Yes.
more towards tickets.
Yes.
So has that been going on?
I think the ratio has raised a little bit,
Yeah.
whereas we can only report the 11. I actually went through and specifically pulled up last time. I apologize, I didn't have time to do it this week. I've had a lot of training and things, but I've actually went through day by day, all the way through the entire quarter and pulled all of the citations and was able to find out exactly how many were done. And last time we were a bit up from the time before. I expect us to be here this time, but I don't have the data right now. I didn't pull it yet. I apologize about that. But that is something that we have talked to our deputies about is, hey, you know, this is a violation. They're asking for citations. Then we should probably be writing a few more. So we'll continue to talk to them about that.
Okay. And then just the last one is that what time of day do you think it is that most of the hours are happening here? As in, I can imagine first thing in the morning, you know, the last thing you guys are doing is South Weaver Drive when you've got so many other areas throughout Davis County that you gotta hit. Is there any chance we can get a little bit more of the evening support when we've got, because I can only speak for myself, but I definitely notice every time I go out after 6, you know, it is definitely a speed zone down the roads.
It seemed so. Our staffing model, the way that we had it, we have day shift, swing, and graveyard. And the way we had it is we had day shift was pretty staffed pretty heavily because we do get a lot of the daytime calls coming in. Swing shift, we dropped off 1 or 2, and then graveyard another 1 or 2. So it kind of went that route. And we're currently evaluating that. And if that's something that you are noticing, you would rather have more in the afternoon, then we can definitely change our staffing model to support that. And we can look at the statistics as well as to when are these calls coming in, like you're saying. And you're right. I think a lot of the speeding happens when people are coming home from school or when they're coming home from work or, you know, in the evening.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I trust you guys. You guys know your business far better than I do, so I'm not going to recommend.
Well, it's good to hear this.
You guys
It's good to hear this because now I know what I can look at, and then, you know, we can play around with and model something and see if we can get a little bit better coverage on certain hours as well.
Whenever you guys think will be the most effective
Yeah.
to stop the extreme speeders.
Yeah,
Because those are the ones, especially down neighborhood roads.
absolutely.
It's, as you can tell, it's dark out there at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and
Absolutely.
that becomes a lot more dangerous. at that
Well,
time,
and
so.
in April, I will be coming back out onto the road, and you guys know where my favorite place is to sit, so I'll be here.
Thank you so much.
All right, yeah, no problem. Anyway, is there anything else?
I just had one quick
Sure.
comment. So I appreciate you guys so much. I will say I have seen a sheriff, and I don't know what he's doing, but I come and go all the time
Mhm.
driving kids. And I saw one sitting over by Sherstill for over 3.5 hours,
Mhm.
same spot. So it's not really, I know there's a lot of that happens down kind of by the river, but
Yeah.
they were not in a very visible area, and they weren't even facing towards where they could see any traffic coming off 89. So
Mhm.
I'd love to kind of understand a little bit more why they would
Sure.
be kind of perched there for so long during the
Sometimes
shift.
we have, so especially this month, we actually had training that because of COVID that is online. And we were told, okay, you need to get all this training done. And it's actually like 6 to 8 hours of training that we have to do. And so I think that, in my opinion, what I've noticed the deputies do is they'll go to their contract city. They'll try to get that done while they're working with the training, yet while still being in a place where they can respond in a timely manner to that contract city. So they may not be actively running radar or doing something, but they're trying to stay where they can at least respond quickly while they're trying to get this training done online. And I've had that issue myself with online training, and it's kind of hard with COVID and trying to fit everything in at the same time. So that's what I've noticed. And I actually asked that question because I think that's been brought up in the past as well. I asked that question to our deputies, and that was the answer that I got.
Okay, appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
So are all Mavericks kind of a hot spot for crime or just ours?
I have noticed gas stations in general are a hot spot, no matter where they're located. And I think since this is pretty much the only gas station you have in a very wide range of area, I think that's why it's a hot spot right here. You've got you've got 84 coming down, 89 going across, and then all the citizens in South Weaver. And if you notice, I didn't really list who the people were, but they were not residents of South Weaver. So I've just noticed that about gas stations, period. The Sinclair that used to be on 89 and Cherry, that was a hot spot. You know, just It's kind of placement, I guess. I don't know.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got just a couple.
Okay.
What Angie brought up with the officers over there by Schursdale. And I can understand what they're doing, but if they could come down and park somewhere there by the charter school or in
Uh-huh.
that empty area there, at least they're more visible there.
Sure.
And
One reason that
I
these
think the
guys will actually
visibility
pick
is what we're.
one reason that
Yeah.
we will pick as law enforcement officers, we'll pick a place that's kind of off and out of the way, is for kind of our safety. Because if our attention is here on the laptop, then it kind of gives us a little bit more time. We'll maybe back in somewhere where our back end is covered, and then that gives us more time to see if someone's walking up on us. It's kind of a safety thing where if you sneak up on an officer and you actually can do it, be prepared for some type of reaction, because we're just trying to protect ourselves. So that is kind of a reason that they'll pick an off corner where you can't see them or you can't really access it too easy.
And then the last is, my big concern is the school crosswalk here on South Labor Drive.
Mhm.
And I happen to be working in the west end of the city here last little while.
Is it the one at 1250 East there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't see any officers there. You know, I haven't seen one. I don't know how often you might patrol that or make your presence there, to just worried about someone getting injured there.
I totally agree. I actually sat out there when I came out for a shift. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and the crossing duty was in the middle, and someone just turned
Yeah.
right off of 1250 East. It turned right, and almost hit her. So I went and had a chat with that person, and I agree with you. And that's something that I can bring up and tell our guys, hey, we need to be sure that we're hitting these and make sure that you're there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for all you do.
Our next presentation is on the storm drain rate study. And Brandon, I think, is going to handle that for us. Is that right, Brandon?
I can get it introduced. We've actually got Aaron Montgomery from Zion's Public Finance, who is doing the rate study online virtually. And he actually has a couple of slides that he's prepared and is going to go over. And then at the end, we can answer some questions. So the purpose of this would be to give you kind of preliminary numbers, get some direction or feedback from you, so that we can continue and bring back something that might be ready to adopt. So hopefully we can get Aaron online here.
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to see if I can share my screen since I have, it says it's disabled. Maybe I have to be allowed to, if that's okay.
We'll make that happen.
There we go. Share. I think we might be in business. How about that? Okay. Like Brandon said, this is just going to be a very short presentation, but we wanted to give you kind of a preliminary look at what the storm drain rate study is producing, and kind of give you an idea of some rate options moving forward and how they've been structured. So I think before we go into the future, though, we'll look at where we're at currently. There we go. So this is the current storm drain rate. So you can see single family and commercial are $8.75, multifamily at $6.95 per unit. These are the monthly rates that are charged. So that's where we're currently at. As we look at the impacts, or the things influencing, I should say, the storm drain utility fund, this is kind of where we're looking at. So we're looking at an evaluation period through fiscal year 2032, so essentially 10 years. And in those 10 years, we've looked at 9 projects which were identified in the city storm water capital facilities plan, and as well as city staff. Those 9 projects totaled to be about $4.6 million. And we're also looking at increasing those costs with inflation. So if they're not scheduled to be done until 2025 fiscal year, then that cost will increase a little bit to help the city better prepare for increasing costs that just come from time. It is anticipated, though, that a portion of these projects will be paid for by impact fee revenues. So there's other things, though, more than just capital projects, even though those are often the big bill. There's also increasing operating costs. And one of the big costs in the capital project that we did want to call out is the construction of the new public works facility, which will also generate some debt obligation for the city. And that debt obligation will create a need for the storm drain fund to participate in its share of repaying that debt. So that's all been included in the costs that are going to be experienced in the storm drain fund, which means that we probably need to look to increase those rates to help offset or to help facilitate the increasing costs that the storm drain fund will be experiencing. So this is the most interesting part. I'm sure you're ready to and willing and just so happy to see rate increase options moving forward. So you can see there fiscal year 2022, and that's where it's at now. Now these rate increase options are anticipating that rates will go to just a flat rate, no more differentiating between single and multifamily, and then moving forward is just one rate for all what we call ERUs, which is the equivalent residential unit. So
Aaron,
so
can I
this
ask you a question?
yeah. Oh yeah,
Would
go ahead,
that
cut me off
start-
anytime.
Sorry, would that start in fiscal year 2023? If the
That's
proposed
right.
change, they would all be the same. There wouldn't be a delineation between single family and multifamily.
Yes, we made that assumption starting in 2023.
Thank you.
Mhm.
One quick clarification, it would start as soon as the council adopted the new rates.
Thank you.
Right. So it wouldn't have to wait until July 1 or a new fiscal year or anything like that. It would happen as soon as the council adopted that.
Thank you.
That's true. That's true. Just in terms of for us to present to project out, we've done it on the fiscal years because it's easier for us to look at budgets and things like that by fiscal year. But like was indicated, anytime that there's an increase will be there. So I'll just walk you through these options. We tried to give you some flexibility. So option 1 shows a smaller increase in fiscal year 2023 to 1375. And then as you can see, as we go down them, that's another smaller increase compared to the other options in 2024. And this option 1 has built in, as you can see there at the end, a 3% increase each year. So while it looks like in fiscal year 2026 that it's a really low option, none of the other ones grow every year afterwards. But there are benefits to having an increase built into your rates, in that hopefully if you're kind of adjusting for increased costs as you move forward, you don't have to ever do a $5 increase again. Your increases should be evaluated, and the income or the revenues and the expenses should be evaluated from year to year to make sure you're not growing your revenues too quickly at even 3%. But it does help maintain financial sustainability without the need for big increases. In option 2, we have the same increase for fiscal year 2023 at 1375, and then a slightly bigger jump in the next 2 years to 18 in 2024, and then 1925 in fiscal year 2025. But then that rate holds steady for the future and should sustain you through, as we said, fiscal year 2032. Option 3 is a one-time, get it all out of the way up front. increase. So this gives you an idea of if you wanted to have a rate increase now with no rate increases in the future, and that would sustain you through your capital projects through the next 10 years, the price would go up to about $18.50. So that one is just that one-time increase, and then the $18.50 should hold you through financial sustainability through 2032 with all the debt obligations and capital projects and such. So I'm gonna actually leave it on this slide. This is the end of the presentation so far. It's preliminary information, but as Brandon said, we're hoping to kind of get feedback on if there's maybe a different option that the council would like to see that maybe follows these. These numbers aren't going to change drastically because they've taken into account the costs and the projects. But if there's something here that you would maybe like to see attempted, we could maybe see if we can structure the rates differently. It's up to you. But I will open it now for questions.
So just to clarify, these rates increases are for after the debt is paid with through our other funds like impact fees and things like that. This is what we'll need in addition to that.
That's right. And impact fees, we've included the impact fees and taken into account a projection of how those will come in. The tough thing about impact fees is they are collected over time, but the projects are paid for all up front. So this kind of takes into account the full project cost, but there is the expectation that over time impact fees will come into the storm drain fund to help kind of retroactively offset. So all of those have been taken into account.
So did it also take into account the increased building that we'll have and the increased users that will be paying into it?
Yeah.
Yes, growth has been accounted for through the projections that were accepted through the impact fee facilities plan and impact fee analysis.
Thank you.
I'd like to know if there was a recommendation or something from the Municipal Utilities Committee that you discussed with.
Do you not sit on that committee?
Well, I have for a day.
You know, maybe Brandon needs to give a little more background, but for those of you who are new or not that involved in the Municipal Utilities Committee, this fund is it's basically non-existent. I mean, it's one of those funds that past council member was pushing very hard for us to figure out what these numbers actually were, so we could start projecting it to get this fund back on where it belongs. I mean, am I saying that correctly? I mean, it's basically, there's no money in those funds to do any of these projects currently that we desperately need done in the city. It's been a fund that's been neglected and put on the back burner for years and years. And so it was something that we requested, the council requested for this to be done. That's why we had the wonderful presentation from Brandon and his staff earlier. That was very short and to the point.
Yes.
And
yes, very thorough, very thorough.
But I mean, yeah, these are not fun numbers to deal with. I don't know that I have a recommendation. I'm still trying to digest this number. I know when we've talked about other rate increases and we had another rate increase that was similar, that we spread out over time. It's been, Angie, I think you're the only one involved with that, and it was something similar to this. It's a hard one to swallow because we already, you talk to your neighbors and they say that we pay the highest utility bills and all of our fees and property taxes are the highest around, yet we still don't have some of this type of money in our funds. But the true fact of that is that these funds have just been flat neglected for 20 years. And it's not anything new. It's just, if we don't address them now, it's just gonna get worse. Or we're gonna have something catastrophic happen.
So we haven't had a rate increase on these in 20 years, am I understanding that? Since
I don't know when the
2000?
last time we did it was.
No, it was shorter than that.
Yeah,
I think it was, but a detailed rate study, I don't think was performed at the time.
We haven't done a full capital facilities with a rate study as long as I can think of.
No, the numbers you're seeing are justified based off of the capital facilities plan, which is, has been presented prior to this, and
You know that it involves all of those capital projects. Everything that needs to be in here, as well as increased operation and maintenance based on our presentation of compliance that we need to make sure that we are taking care of. All of those are in here. And so this is kind of what is projected to be needed in order for us to just take care of business.
So Brandon and Aaron, just a quick question. I'm assuming that mathematically, all three of these equal the same total amount when you get to 2032? Is that
They don't.
theoretically?
They don't necessarily. I think option one actually provides a little bit better ending point in 10 years.
Do you want me to answer to that? Because
Sure.
I know.
You can maybe speak to the cash on hand element.
Yeah,
of that, Aaron?
so the goal, there's a couple goals, and like I said, this is preliminary. I'm sure there will be in time we'll have more. But our goal is to try and help the city maintain 150 minimum days cash on hand. So that's making sure you have enough money to cover your expenses in your funds. We try and actually keep it at 180. That's more healthy. And so part of this and why there's three options. So option one that gives you slower increases, but a 3% increase each year after ends up the highest, obviously, because it's going to be over 1850. And 1850 in option three is going to be where it stays through 2032. So the first option will end up probably being the highest, but it would set you up for the best because it has a built-in adjustment. Whereas the rest of these options, option two and option three, they hold constant after, I guess, mutually fiscal year 2025 is where you can kind of see those two level off. But by the end of it, you would assume there would probably be a need for another analysis and rate increase. So, whereas the first option will kind of has the effort to keep you growing slowly so that you don't have to do another jump of these options. So the long answer to your question, option three, which has the biggest jump initially, will have you at the lowest rate in 2032 at the end of the fiscal year, or I mean the end of the report scope or span. But it has the most at the beginning. So you kind of build up more cash on hand in the beginning, which then trickles out near the end. So that's why that one would be the lowest. So probably the most painful to stomach, but also the one that has the least amount of increases. And if you get more coming in the beginning, you have less need later on.
So that's kind of the follow-up question I had. So 2032, we're going to hit a need to jump again. Is that kind of the expectation? It's just always going to increase?
Options 2 and 3, it would be, there would probably be a need to look at it again because we haven't projected out, and it's honestly hard to make financial projections because things can change out 10 years, but we've done the best we can. But I would say, yeah, you would want to, if you don't have any increases built in, you would want to probably look again because expenses and capital projects will continue to come along. And if your rates hold too steady, then there may be a need for another rate increase at that time, just to make sure that you sustain. I wouldn't think it would be, with the way that we've tried to structure this, it wouldn't be, another $5 increase, but it might be time at that time to start looking at increases to maintain increasing costs and make sure you have financial coming in. So maybe, and I'm not a fortune teller, but maybe an increase at that time of 5% or something like that, just because it's expected that costs will keep going up. And this study now is not looking past that time.
My final question is, what is a typical percentage increase for other cities?
In the ones that we do, this is kind of where everyone ends up if they call on us to do one and they haven't done increases for a while. There's normally a known need that the revenues are not paying for the expenses. Maybe the funds are, what's the word, helped by the general fund. And so they know that they need to make an adjustment. And so there's normally a need for substantial increases. This isn't unusual, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right.
And percentage wise, I don't know specifics, but it's not unusual to see 25, 50% increases in other places.
Yeah, I can understand, getting back on track. I'm just wondering, once we get to where we want to be, is there going to be a 3% increase every year thereafter to stay on top of it? Or is it like a 1% once you finally get there?
Well, let me just jump in, Aaron. We have capital projects identified through 2047.
Is that including these 9 that we're talking about now?
It does, yes. But there's a fair amount that will still need to be taken care of after this next 10 years. So it's not anticipated that the costs of those projects would go down. I mean, I think generally, unfortunately, the trend is that things go up over time. And I think if you are doing small increases, what my observation is the small increases typically end up making funds healthier for longer. Big jumps are helpful for a little while, but then it as Aaron already stated, it kind of trickles off, and then you're upside down again.
Yeah,
but knowing exactly what is going to happen in 10 years, I mean, things could be different in 5 years. I mean, this is trying to capture as much as we know and can predict at this point in time.
Yeah. And if I could just add one thing on that, I would say it is always a healthy practice we always look at 10 years, and hopefully I would think anyone who does a rate study would look at least 10 years. So in 5 years, it might not be a bad idea to check back in. Even if you did option 1, which has increases of 3% each year, we would do another rate study that says, okay, if this is our anticipated increases, is it enough? And then you would grab out again another 10 years and see where you're going in the future. And that rate study might find that you're doing just great, and there's no need to do any more increases. If option 2 or option 3 are done, even more reason to look at it in 5 years. Like Brandon was saying, look at the next 5 years of capital projects and make sure that your rates as they're set up now are going to sustain you through those next 5 years, or if you need to make any adjustments. But like I said, if you kind of get yourself back on track, I would expect you wouldn't need big jumps again anytime in the near future. These are normally what happens if, one, there's increases in construction costs that were unforeseen, or 2, just neglect of rate increases for multiple years or decades sometimes.
If I may add to that, we look at all of our revenue streams and run into the same types of philosophies. And one of those philosophies, especially as the council looked at the property tax revenue stream a couple of years ago, was that large increase. And then the conversation was, we can't let that happen again. We need to stay on top of that over time. I think generally speaking, option 1 is kind of the more financially viable, more of the politically viable, more of the option that provides the most long-term strategy to an approach to finances. And that is, find where you're meeting your needs and then have that kind of inflationary element to it, so that you're not losing ground to inflation, but you're checking in literally annually. Every time we set rates and project revenue for the next fiscal year, look at that and just say, are the needs changing, or is the rate changing based on things outside of inflation. If there are things outside of inflation that need to be addressed, you can address that. But if not, then you're already kind of got a philosophy of maintaining that buying power over time and not getting behind. Where the other ones create that need to basically jump again after a period of time, and we find ourselves in the same position. I know that changing rates every year is not exciting and it's not desirable necessarily we all would love to just have that rate and be able to bank on that rate for our monthly utility bills and all types of costs that we incur in our own lives and in city business. But from a financial perspective, I think that's why option one has the greatest viability, just from a numbers game and from a strategy standpoint of financial health.
Any questions?
Yeah, I do. This is just a presentation. What's our next step with this?
The next step is we would prepare the materials for the adoption of actual rates, and it would come back before the council to adopt rates. Essentially pick an option, and if the council wants to kind of discuss options and say this is the one that we're leaning toward now, we could present the materials like that. And prepare that to come back before the council. If the council wants to chew on it, we could essentially prepare those materials with blanks in it, and you could pick which option you want, and we could then insert that into the decision-making and action item.
You guys ready to pick an option, or you want to look a little more?
I can tell you, I'm not ready to pick an option. I mean, I think we need to chew on it a little bit. I'm open. I don't necessarily want to do this, but I'm open to answering Angie's question by taking it back to the Municipal Utilities Committee and giving you an answer and coming back with what we do recommend and why we recommend that option. I mean, I am struggling with the $5 increase. I mean, it's, when you look at it, we're almost doubling pretty quick. And so, and for those that are multifamily units, it's more than that because they're going from a lower rate to the base rate. So anyway, I don't necessarily need to kick it to the committee, but if someone has another suggestion, I'm open to that. I'm just trying to come up with a way that it can be discussed and we can kind of get into some nitty gritty with maybe Brandon and maybe come back with a recommendation.
To answer your question, I'm happy to take it back to committee if that's
Okay.
what everybody wants.
Everyone good with that?
Yeah.
Going back to
The only question I have though is that if it's kind of a general consensus that option one is better because of the continual increases as we go, why couldn't option 2 and 3 have a similar increase built into it? Or, you know, so that, because right now, if one is probably the most, you know, sound, then I think we would probably want to at least explore having 2 and 3 with that say built into it. And maybe we can help by eliminating, you know, just a straight 1850 straight across going on, you know, or something. So, because I do agree, as long as we have that increase built into it, automatically that keeps us from falling behind again. So, and you know, if you guys looked at that.
So this sucks. With the option one, you know, after 2026, going to 2032, we're looking at like $21.60-ish, if I did my math right, which we all know may or may not be correct. But, you know, you have that with an increase in obviously property taxes, an increase in our sewer, likely, our garbage, likely. We don't know what's going to happen with our TUF, but currently that's still on the table. It's a lot. And I know that we need to plan, and I'm not saying that we don't. But I don't know if an option looking into increases every other year or something can help. I'm not sure, but that is a gouger for sure. So good luck, committee.
I'll just add, you know, I agree. It's unfortunate that we have this. If we are underfunded right now, what is the value in doing option one? We stay underfunded and then we have something come up. So I don't know. I'm just kind of leaning a little bit what Joel was saying. I mean, if we're going to take a hit, you take the hit and jump a whole bunch and then keep it steady, or just bump every other year, every third year rather than every year. And, you know, I don't know, just some option 4 or 5 that might,
Do we have any other options to help us bring in revenue?
Not for storm drain, no. The beauty and the pain of enterprise funds is that they stand on their own that way.
You know, I think from what you're saying, the 3 philosophies just kind of restate. And the first was if we just take a one-time hit. The other one was the progressive hit, number 1, and number 2 is kind of in between. It looks, I know since I have been here, we have done rate studies, we've done capital facilities plans on all the other enterprises. But when it comes to what, and I apologize because maybe I shouldn't say this in public, but this is the one fund, Dave's looking at me, what are you going to say? This is the one fund that has never had, to my knowledge, a study like this done on it. The rates were more or less picked out of the air. When we had an increase, it says, well, okay, let's do a $1 increase. I remember proposing that. We looked at the next budget. It says to get through the next couple of years, not looking long-term, let's do a $1 increase. And then there was like another $1 increase. Now they've looked at it, but it's not just totally picked out of the air, but it was looked at short-term. It was not looked at, okay, this is a 10-year, what do we do on 10 years? It was looked at every time. What do we need right now? What is a 1 or 2 year vision of the rates? And so when you actually prepare to make the city more stable, look at long-term forecasting, which is what we've tried to do since I've been here, is to take the vision from, let's look, how much do we need for next year to get through 1 year, and go out 10. As Brandon said, he's got it out to 2046 as the capital projects. Looking so far ahead, when you try and look at it, it makes it very painful sometimes to see it on the right schedule. And we recognize those kind of hits. We all have, not only for the city, but in our own pocketbooks and what we have to face. But I can say that I've been involved with what they've been doing and the figures. They've looked at this backwards and forwards, long-term, taken so many things into account as to what would be options and what needs to be so that this fund is a sustainable fund, not just for 5 years, not for 10, but ongoing. And yes, we should look at it every 5 years at a minimum. We went through some things. We looked at impact fees were not looked at for 14 years at one point. So we are trying to make sure we look at it on a timely basis and make minor adjustments. And that's, as your finance director, that's just what I wanted to say is this takes the vision of this fund as we're looking at other things in the city from a focus of 1 or 2 years to 10 years specifically, but even farther than that down the road.
Okay, thank you. Let's take it back to committee then, and then committee will come back and make their recommendation.
And if you have any questions that you specifically want answered, send them to Angie or I or Brandon or whoever, because I think one of the big questions we have to answer is when we do the different options, when can we come back with, when does that start getting us to where we can start accomplishing something? So anyway, sorry,
And I've written down those notes of suggestions so we can start from there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, action items, our consent agenda, which consists of January 4th minutes, January 11th minutes, January check register, and December budget to actual. Do we have any discussion on any of those items? If not, is someone ready to make a motion?
Mayor, I'll make the motion to approve the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay. Couple of resolutions. Resolution 20-09, policy and procedure amendment. We're gonna have a discussion on that. And Mac, are you going to take care of this one?
I can key that one up. You do have a summary that talks about what the reason for this is. Each year we do a fraud risk assessment, and as part of that, it came out that there's certain areas of the city that we have policies and certain areas that we have practices, but it's not in a written policy. And so I was tasked with going out and putting into our policies and procedures those specific policies that the state looks at and we did not have currently in written form in our policies and procedures. Some of those we had them maybe like ethics and code of conduct were combined as one section, and it really should be two different sections. So what you've been provided with is going to the state law, looking what's in the state law of what we should have, and taking recommendations from the state auditor's office of what should be in our policies, comparing that with what we had and what a few other cities had to make it what we felt is South Weber, should be South Weber's policies. This was also given to all employees for review and to get their input on it, and which has been incorporated for those who responded back and had suggestions or questions. So it comes before you tonight. You have both the red line version and the final draft version. They're all in Chapter 7, the changes that are being made to actually formalize several policies that we didn't have. Some we hadn't even really thought of, but for example, one of them, it establishes a reporting system, a fraud hotline. It's not one that you necessarily call up and we have somebody waiting there to dial in like some of your other quote hotlines, but it is a formal way that somebody who suspects or is questions that there might be fraud occurring can report that to the city and the policies, who it reports to, and so forth. We've gone over, incorporated the work that was done a little over a year ago by Lisa on ethics and making sure that our ethics policy was updated, but we made sure that that is now formally also corresponds and is the same in our policies and procedures manual. So that's where we are. Those are the changes. I'd be happy if you have any questions on any of the thing that is in the policies and procedures manual. Though that they're different, they have a different number, which basically it's each one established it as its own policy. Some were added, a few were, one or two or three were modified. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, if you have any.
Okay, anyone?
I have some questions, Mayor. On page 159 of the packet, it talks about our internal auditor. Is that Mac, our finance director?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. On page 129 of the packet, it talks about fair and equal, no, prohibited conduct after leaving the city on section 11. It says no former employee shall during the period of 1 year after leaving city office or employment, and then it goes on to list disclose any privileged or proprietary information. My question on that was, is 1 year a standard that most cities adhere to? Is that sufficient?
That's the recommendation of the state auditor.
Okay.
And that's why that's in there, is that the state auditor has recommended that 1 year, there are certain things, basically there are certain things that are confidential while you're an employee, you don't share, personnel records, different things. And it says, just because you leave doesn't relieve you of those things that have certain privacy issues. They're not secret, you know, the council members may have, are aware of those, but different other laws pertain to what we can disclose and can't disclose. HIPAA is a big one. And
So
so it just says, okay, you just don't do that for at least a year.
Angie, you raise a good point, and as I read this, I think it ought to be amended because there's privileged and proprietary information that should remain confidential for.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I feel. I mean, it's specific meetings I can think of that really should never be divulged.
Yeah, and I understand the intent here, right? That it would be procurement information, proprietary information, information about the city's plans, you know, that an individual may use to try to pursue his or her own monetary gain. But I think the way it's written is a little bit confusing because if you have personnel information or medical information or litigation related information, you know, that always should be protected and you would not be able to divulge it even if you left employment.
So your recommendation was,
I think
In
we ought to
perpetuity?
redraft that. Romanet 1, it's under section 11 that talks about disclosing privilege or proprietary information, just to clarify that the categories of information that can never be disclosed or used. And then those categories of information that have a confidential shelf life, for lack of a better term, where for a period of time they'd be confidential and then after that they wouldn't be.
the other two were typos. Lisa said she might have corrected them, so I'm gonna go look at those. So that's what I have on that for right now.
Any other questions?
First off, I appreciate all the hard work that's been put into this. It's obvious that there's been a lot of thought. The overall format where this is more for a policy manual, I think that the language used is a little bit confusing at times. I mean, it's very good legally, but I think for the policy manual itself, for people to understand and get an idea, I think that it could be morphed more into that direction. One of the things that I've noticed is that as you go through and you've put in here different things for disqualification of being able to do South Weaver business, the state's municipal employee act that they actually have a lot of definitions in it that are already predefined. And one of the things that they have is government action or governmental action. And that I think you're trying to get to that on a couple of these where it's talking about the proper discharge of official duties. So I would recommend that we take literally the verbiage that they have on there for governmental action, which has a good list of everything that can be involved in it, whether it's an activity, a transaction, anything from signing a contract to doing, you know, the initial search into that. And I would recommend using some of that language directly, just so that we match the state on it. But yeah, I mean, really, this is fantastic. I love especially the first section where it talks about disqualification if you do have that conflict of interest. And then one of the other things that I noticed on it was that down at the very bottom, number 12, where it talks about the ethical behavior pledge, all city employees, council members are required to an annual sign-in or sign that document. That is actually also at the paragraph just before we start under employee ethics at the very beginning, the current documentation. And it just says right in there that they're going to sign it. So I would have that on one or the other, not a big deal. But and then the last one is, I know this is a policy manual, and I guess this is more for Dave and staff. if we're doing this now, I think it actually behooves us and allows us to leverage all of this work that's going on to make this part of code for the city, so that I know it's in policy manual, but I would like to actually see it codified so that conflict of interest have to be handled a certain way. And then the last one is, if we do that, and I could add it on here or in code, would be that if they have a question, it currently recommends going to your department head, the city manager. I would also like to add the city attorney, because I think that a lot of times we may have a question of what is or isn't legally a conflict of interest. And I think it would be kind of hard to get the whole ball rolling sometimes without knowledge of, okay, this is actually something that we need to look into. But I do think, I mean, I do think that this is a fantastic start on it. And yeah, I mean, you can tell that a lot of work has been done on it.
Can I ask a question to that point? Jamie, could you answer for me? What would be the difference if we just have this as a policy versus if it's in code for the conflict of interest?
Policy is not binding, and that would be the biggest difference. So if you were to put some of the things in here in the code, then it would be required and have the force of law for city employees. It would have to peel back the layers a little bit on what Councilmember Dills is recommending, but it's a good suggestion. The state law, the Municipal Officers and Employees Ethics Act, and we'll talk about it a little bit later tonight. That may prompt some discussion on it, but it requires in most circumstances disclosure, but not recusal. And there are some cities that will go further than that. And in certain circumstances, they'll require recusal, and that somebody not participate in discussions or in votes if they have a conflict of interest, where state law would require disclosure in certain circumstances, but you may continue to participate.
I would just also want to just get clarification. You're not talking about taking the entire, every policy that we have and codifying.
Oh, heavens no.
No, you know, okay, so
I'm
for
talking specifically
clarification.
on the conflict of interest section that you've done.
Okay, that's which sections that we're talking about is the recommendation for codification as opposed to the entire book. you
Yeah,
know?
I'm speaking specifically about the conflict of interest. And we brought this up last time, how conflict of interest, especially where we have so little in code right now, this actually protects the city, protects us as public servants. So if it has that requirement of the recusal, I think that takes out any of the complications or issues that may arise with, okay, well, I think, you know, so-and-so is doing something wrong. Well, this is, you know, a council that works really well together, and it's not something that necessarily you would feel comfortable bringing forward, even in some type of private matter, unless you go directly to, like I was saying, the city attorney or something. So yeah, that's the only section I'm looking at, is just the conflict of interest being moved over to it. Because the rest of it, yeah, I mean, that is just policy and should just be policy.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a question for, maybe for Jamie. So there are times in this where we talk about employees and officers, and then there's specific times when it talks about elected and appointed officials. So in the way that this is written, is an elected official or an appointed official considered an employee, or is only when it specifically calls out those titles?
I would read it as an employee is an employee, and elected and appointed is different
Okay.
than an employee. You do have one exception, as the city manager, who is both an appointed official and an employee.
Okay, so when we're looking through this, in the case outside of when it specifically calls out the council, it's just speaking to non-elected.
Yes. And as I
employees.
think about it, I think your city recorder also is
And the
and
treasurer,
appointed
the
in the-
recorder, and the finance director.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the
Well,
city, as far as appointed, there's David The city manager is a little bit different, but there's the three appointed officials are the treasurer, the recorder, and the finance director, or by state statute or quote, appointed.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is that the municipal act actually, under its definitions, does define an appointed officer and a elected officer. I think that kind of clarifying that in here would also help. So,
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going, same question I had that Joel had was just the definitions, because I was reading it and I'm like, well, which one applies to me as an elected official and which ones do not? And it was called out in some cases and not others. And I'm not sure if this entire new section here was intended for council and staff, or just employees, or what the intention was there, but that was the question I had. And then the other one was number 12. I did not catch earlier, but in 12, it just shows council members, but in the above paragraph that Joel caught, it included the planning commission. So I would either add planning commission in number 12 or just take number 12 out, whichever one works. But thank you. I can see that this is a lot of great things that I can see that our city definitely needs. So I appreciate the work on it very much.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your input on this because like I said, the more eyes that look at it, and this is a policy for the city. And so that's why we're bringing it back to see what you feel. As Jamie pointed out, some cities go farther than the state law, which is in certain areas you can, in certain areas you can't. And Jamie's very, you can make something more restrictive and sometimes you can't. So that kind of input, and we'll go back and take those and work with Jamie and look at these things and see what we can do. The idea of the definitions and the development of the total policies and procedures manual has never been one that we've really looked at real strongly, but I can see that we need to, and that wasn't on my mind at the time I was doing the other parts, but I appreciate your input on that because we'll go back and make sure that the definitions are there from the state definitions that would make these things more clear. So thank you.
One last thing, I noticed under the accepted gifts and loans, you don't have a $50 limit, which probably is an arbitrary number, with the cost of sushi these days. But
it is in there.
It is in there.
It is, it does have a 50?
Mhm.
Okay.
13. Yeah, which is the exact same number as the state.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Mayor, I just have two typos. Page 281 of the packet is where it says SH and then handling, Lisa, what we discussed. Okay. And then on page 313, it says bring your own device, BOYD. It should be BYOD. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good catches.
Any other discussion or questions? We'll ask for a motion then.
So are we wanting to continue this so you can modify and tweak? Is that?
That's what it sounded like to me.
That's what I thought.
Go for it, Clint.
I'll make the motion that we continue resolution 22-09, the policies and procedures amended with the items noted. I'm not going to list them all off, but typos relative to conflict of interest, planning commission addition, and et cetera.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Have a second. We'll begin with the roll call vote then with Councilman Dill.
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. Our next item then is the resolution 22-10, property lease agreement with Keith Christensen. Dave, did you say you'd take care of that?
Yeah, I can do a brief introduction here. Keith, a resident of the city, approached the city a few years ago, I'd say, something like that. And there was a verbal agreement made that he could store some equipment, trailers, things like that, on city-owned property in an attempt across the board as we try to have less of those types of deals and more documented written agreements. We wanted to put this pen to paper and bring that forward to the council to review that and consider that. So Keith's here to answer any questions as well.
Keith, do you have anything to say or just answer questions?
Whatever questions you got. for
Okay,
me.
anyone have any questions for Keith?
So just so you know where this piece of ground is, as you go down 1375, there's a little sliver of ground between Old Canyon and New Canyon. And that is where all the storm drain runs down, cruises under the freeway and out to the river. And it's 75 feet wide by like 150 feet deep. Can't be built on, can't do anything with it. So I've made some improvements. I've gravelled the entire thing, made it nice, look good, stored a couple tractors down there, a couple trailers. I do keep the weeds down. And any rate, so anyway, and so the agreement was is as long as we kept it looking nice, then nobody complained, I could keep my stuff there. So that's where we're
It looks better than it did when we took care of it. No offense.
at. So, any questions there? We good?
So I
Go
just
ahead.
have one. Is this area developed now? What I'm looking at? So how do you access the property?
Just right off Canyon. It literally dead ends off of 1375.
Oh, it's not this side? Oh, sorry.
If you go
my
down
bad.
1375, if you were to just keep going straight through, you'd go right to the freeway. It's just a little.
It's where Wes wanted to put a bridge or a trail under the freeway, highway.
Okay. Oh, I know where. Okay.
Gotcha.
So my only question, comment, I appreciate the updated text and things like that. We still say property at instead of between. Is there a technical difference between that?
Yeah.
Because it
so-
says the city owns property at 1372 and 1380, but we don't really own the property at those.
The way we have to, it doesn't have a parcel number, and so the way we have to refer to it is the two parcels and the two addresses for the parcels. And so the way that provision is written, it's not referring to those parcels, but it's saying parcel numbers 005 and 001, which parcels are located at, and then the at is for where those two parcels are, not where the property that's being leased is located.
Okay.
Any other questions? I've got just one, Keith. Was it your recommendation to do this annually? Would you entertain more than, at least
Originally,
on
it
more
was-
than a year or 2 years or
I am
3, 4,
totally
5?
indifferent as to how you would like to set this up. Originally, it was just, as long as I kept it looking good, I could keep stuff there. That was kind of the deal. It's kind of a gentleman's agreement we had several years ago. And again, let's make things official, whatever. So I'm game for whatever you want to do.
I think
So-
it just would be a multi-year. We wouldn't have to keep bringing this back every year.
That'd probably be
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
So that being said, Mayor, how does the council feel about that, changing this to like a 5-year contract?
I'm open for it. I mean, could it be, I was thinking, could it just be automatically renewed by staff versus council?
yeah.
Yeah,
What
I
I
was gonna
what I
say the
would
same.
recommend,
We have the provisions within the agreement to end it on either side if we
Correct.
need to, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all written down.
So,
Jamie?
you could make it so it automatically renews unless acted upon by other parties. And there's a provision in there that allows either party to terminate.
Perfect.
That's better. 12 months goes fast.
yeah, it does.
That would just need to be included in the motion, that change.
Okay, I'll ask for a motion then. Someone would like to make a motion?
Mayor, I make a motion, we approve resolution 22-10, property lease agreement with Keith Christensen with the clarification that this contract automatically renews every 12 months until canceled by either party.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Have a roll call vote, starting with Councilman Halverson.
Aye.
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 Okay, unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith. Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have code enforcement that we'd like to talk about, and Trevor, he's going to handle that.
Everyone's favorite subject. Either love it or you love to hate it. No, I'm really excited to get going on this. We've talked back in September, we had a preliminary conversation about just code enforcement in general, and kind of what we would like to see for the organization and for the city moving forward for enforcement. Just for the sake of the conversation, since we have new city council members and new mayor, we'll kind of briefly talk about our process for code enforcement. Our code enforcement process isn't unlike other cities around. It's not incredibly unique, but what we do have built into it is a lot of cure periods, or periods that need to be met in order for us to enforce something. We do have an abatement process and we have a criminal process. Both are a little cumbersome, and both tend to not get the desired result quickly. The quickest action is, just education and getting somebody to conform through that. But we understand there's a desire and a need to have a stick with the carrot at times. And so as we've had the conversation, right now our code is they have 14 days to bring the property in compliance. After that, then we issue a citation, and it goes through, or a notice of violation, and it goes through one of the two processes there. Those processes do require some due diligence, some time to come back and dispute the charges or run through the process. So we require that. And typically when we see it go through the criminal stage, it's not well received by judges, and so often it is dismissed. I can let Lisa kind of talk about that a little bit if you have any questions on that. But typically those are hard to prosecute. They're hard to defend, and so are hard to on our side to go through. And so the judge normally not discontinues, but you know what I'm saying. Dismisses. There we go. Thank you. The charge. What we've talked about this in code committee, and Jamie has drafted up an ordinance about it. It is, let me zoom in a little bit so we can get a little more personal on it. It basically opens up the whole arsenal to us, which we love. Not to get people in trouble. I think that's really important to note, that we're not out to get everybody in trouble and collect $1 million on code enforcement. That's not our goal. Our goal is compliance, and we'd rather than come into compliance and never charge a fee at all. But like I said, sometimes you need a stick with the carrot, and this provides us with lots of sticks, and frankly a lot of carrots to get that into motion. So we will continue to have a criminal option as our code enforcement, but then we will have more civil options for citations and notices there. So you can see in the civil, we have a citation bracket, an abatement bracket, and a nuisance bracket. A lot of that is due because of the various types of infractions that can happen. Right, through state law, nuisance ordinances need to be handled a particular way versus maybe a one-time issue that might be a citation. I think one example in that is if a dog was defecating in the park, which we've heard complaints about. That would not be a nuisance violation. Probably not even an abatement violation. It would be a citation at that point. Something that can be rectified, but it was an infraction, and it needs to be handled. So that's kind of how we have this built here. So what are the criteria for using those? That's the first box there. So criminal is prior violations, cases of causes injury, multiple violations in single episode, and significant health or safety risk. So those are like the top tier. We really need to do something about them immediately, and we need to get going on that. A citation is a single violation. No abatement or remedial action is required. Again, it's something that you visually see and you can cite at that point. Abatement is a violation will continue to exist without abatement or remedial action, and often involves conditions on real property. And a nuisance is a violation that is a public threat, a threat to public health, safety, welfare, or obstructs, injures, or interferes with the reasonable or free use of property.
Trevor?
Yes.
So under abatement, that would be something, say like weeds in the yard or cars parked in the yard or those kind of things, something that can be changed. What would, say like, short-term rentals or any of those kind of items, where would they fall under? Is that still abatement, or is it a nuisance because of something happening at the individual time? I'm just trying to understand what the different categories break down to.
Yeah, it would fall under that abatement column. And just recognize as you look at this, this is a way to kind of organize and hang your thoughts, but abatement is a general term. But I think what you would do is pursue it as a civil violation, and then it would be under that abatement column. So you would assign it a penalty, and then the penalty would accrue with each day being a new and separate violation.
Okay.
And then if it were an issue, say with parking or noise or things of that sort, then I think you could go in and abate that particular portion of it. It would only fall into the nuisance category if you had things that related to public health, safety, or welfare.
And we say civil on here, but this also handles business, commercial the same way.
Yes, and
Okay.
civil's just referring to legally the penalty is,
Not criminal.
civil, it's a fine or abatement or costs, those types of things. But criminal would be an actual criminal violation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What that allows us to do is kind of process you go through the process quicker, because we're not relying on the justice court system, which is very quick, right, Lisa? She would love it to be quicker, I'm sure. And I'm sure everybody would, but that's just kind of the state that we're in. So the civil process allows us to handle it in-house a little bit more and assess those fines. And we'll talk about the fines right now. So available penalties, criminal is a Class B misdemeanor, $1,000 fine and or 6 months imprisonment. In the citation, these are all very similar, right? Except for citations, there's $100 for the first violation, $200 for the second, $400 for the third, or more. That kind of gives us a way for us to look at the severity of the infraction and judge it at that point. But it gives us a framework. The state law does kind of restrict the amount that we can charge per day. And so if you look at the abatement, that's we have a $100 minimum or a $1,000 maximum. That is the maximum allowed by the state, right, Jamie?
Yeah, so the frameworks you see here are those allowed by state, although you could go below a $100 minimum, but I don't think anything below that is really meaningful. So the $100 would be my recommendation as a floor. $1,000 is the statutory ceiling, so you cannot go higher than that. And then what I would recommend is that for certain violations, you may wish to identify a penalty in code. And for other violations, you may wish to have a policy that could be referred to. You do need to make sure that whatever penalty is assessed for a given situation is founded in some kind of policy so that those decisions aren't arbitrary and capricious and that they're applied consistently to various violations.
So like right now in code, we have operating a business without a license, and I believe code specifically says $250 fine.
Correct.
So that's separate from this, as in this won't override it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Anywhere where it's called out specifically, then you would default to that specific amount.
Okay.
But Trevor, we may want to make a note of that and add a provision making clear that where there are more specific penalties identified, that's where we go. But that is how I would interpret the code.
Oh, there we go. I'm opening up my. Okay, it's there, you just can't see it. Alrighty, so on civil penalties, it's $100 minimum, $1,000 maximum per day. And then we can charge additional fees for abatement, administrative fees, and things like that. And then nuisance is very similar, but again, we have to treat them different because the nuisance code is very specific with the state. And so we just have to classify it in its own realm.
There are two major differences between nuisance and abatement. Nuisances relate again to health, safety, or public welfare. And often you're intervening quicker so that that condition doesn't exist and endanger people. And then the other key difference is down at the very, very bottom of whether the violation can be recorded against the property. If you abate a nuisance and you have fines for that nuisance and, or I shouldn't say fines, but the penalty amount for that nuisance. And if you had the costs associated with abating the nuisance, you can perfect that as a tax lien. And that's much easier to recover as a city than if you were to do something as a civil abatement.
Who issues the citation? If it's a criminal offense, it'd be Davis County Sheriff. If it's civil offense, then it'd be code enforcement officer. And then who enforces the violation? This is important. We would have our own appeal authority. So if you want to appeal your and have the due process for your civil offense, then we would provide an appeal authority for them to go through. There are different options. What we've determined is to use the same appeal authority that we have for our land use appeal and other appeals. Is that I'm looking for confirmation.
We're all nodding our head over here.
I think that's what the code committee recommended. The options you see in cities is sometimes it's a code enforcement official within the city that's assigned that duty. Sometimes it's the city manager. That's really just a practical calculation of who you think has the time and the ability to deal with these. How many do you think you'll have? In some cities, it is the city council. I wouldn't recommend that. I think it becomes a burden for the city council to hear those types of things. But
I told them
the
all I thought it
spectrum.
would be fun and I think we should do it, but
Well, and I don't want to do it. But let me ask you this. So if it becomes something significant, though, and I don't know what that level becomes significant, should it not then be city council? Let's say it's something where there's a building that's a health safety hazard that needs to be torn down. It's a $60,000 bill. That's something that shouldn't just be dealt with through staff, in my opinion, especially if it's going to get appealed. You know, I question whether that, I mean, whether we set a limit where those, I mean, because again, I don't foresee us having this type of thing, but there have been several conversations or things that have happened that could potentially have been that large. And where would that have gone?
Are you speaking specifically to the abatement idea that if we were to go
If we
in
were
and
to
fix the
go in and
problem on
fix the
our
problem on
dime,
our dime,
that there's some threshold?
yep, and then that gets appealed. And I wouldn't want that if I was in your shoes coming to be appealed to you.
Well, I
Well,
know
go
that
to-
I know that our procurement policy with our thresholds and whatnot would still be in place. We would have to establish a budget for an amount of money we're setting aside for abatement. If there's no money there, then we can't go in and
I agree.
abate anything, right? So there's still that check and balance, but I agree with the authority limit there to try to make sure that we think through that.
So,
I concur.
Do we just is it as simple, Jamie, as putting an or statement in the code where it's the selected official or?
Well, maybe Blair can help
yeah, I'm kind of
clarify a
confused.
little bit. I think I'm hearing two
Yes.
different decision points. One is the decision point of, do you assess a penalty or abate a problem? And at what threshold is the city manager delegated that authority, and at what threshold should it be delegated to the city
And I,
council?
and I agree, that is right.
And then the other question is, violators have a due process right. And the reason you have the appeal authority is to ensure that they have that due process. So if we have to go to court to enforce something, we've complied with that requirement. So I guess, Blair, what's your preference there? Do you want the due process right to be heard by the city council, or is it that in certain circumstance you would want the city council to be the body authorized to begin the abatement?
And maybe
or the
that's more it,
nuisance
and
process?
it gets back to the procurement. It's similar to what we dealt with the procurement levels. I mean, those are the levels I think we're all comfortable with.
I would,
But if you just don't want to give this blanket thing to
Yeah.
cause
So
a bigger Pandora's box.
If that's your concern, then I think what I would recommend is either in the policy or in the code, some delineation of the authority for chasing these things and who it resides with, and then keep the appeal authority with a single entity. And the only reason I don't recommend the city council be the appeal authority is, as we experienced with Cobblestone, that takes a lot of time for a lot of people. And if you have an appeal authority, you can have one person that you would hire to carry out that function, and they can hold those a lot quicker and a lot simpler and at less expense for the city than if the council's hearing them.
I do see with procurement, for instance, Chris, our code enforcement officer, is here tonight, if he wants to jump in and talk. But Chris can only approve up to a certain amount of dollars. So he has to get quotes and everything before we can assess an abatement cost. We can't just go bulldoze something and say, oh, just pay us later. So I think when he hits his limit, it would come to me. When I hit my limit, it would go to Dave. And when Dave hits his limit at 10,000, then it would go to the city council. And all of those would have to fall under a budgeted line item that was passed by the city council. So I do feel like there's checks there, but I think if we wanted to add that additional protection in there for you.
Are you comfortable with those same dollar limits in an abatement context?
I think I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't foresee it happening. I also don't want to get, and I'll just be honest, I don't want to see it get abused with the farmer down the road, because all the neighbors are now moved around him. And maybe I'm one of those poor guys with a bunch of junk that now they're complaining, and I'm starting to get citations from Chris, and it just keeps going and going and going. And I mean, I just don't want to see the abatement get abused. So now Chris is coming and towing things, but because it falls under that $2,000 limit, and we're losing sight of who we are as South Weber if we just start doing all that. And I think Chris has kept a very good balance with that. And I don't want to see that it's given, I mean, again, you've had that authority. I just don't want it to be something that the elected officials and some people aren't aware of, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe, I don't know. Go ahead. You can come up, Chris.
I think while Chris is coming up, I think it's important to look at the procedure too. We will still give them a notice of violation with at least a 10-day cure period. We can make a determination, if it's something larger, that we can give them longer, or we can start with a 10-day period and they can call up Chris and say, I really can't get somebody out here to mow down my weeds for 30 days. Can you give me that? And we can extend that period. So it does allow, like I said, it does allow for some teeth, but it does allow for some flexibility on our side to get that compliance. Because like I said, the goal is compliance, not to collect the fee, and not really to abate. Abate is an option if we ultimately need to, and there's no other way to get something accomplished that is for the betterment of the community. But I think there is a process there that allows them, that cure period. And then once the fee's assessed, then we can proceed at that point on the hearing and the appeal authority at that point. But
Trevor is absolutely spot on. Building the communication with our citizens, trying to get that cooperation with them to care about their property is most important. If they can't do that with simple communication with me, then yes, we have to move to the citation process. I like to try to keep citation process to around that $1,000 point before I would recommend that they come into courts. Because when you get the cost so high, a judge is going to look at it and say, well, I'm going to waive $900 of it, and so you only have to pay $100. It doesn't do you much good to go much higher than that. Now, when we're talking about abatement of a property, this last year, I did a good tracking of our weed properties. And there's 37 weed properties that I had accounted for here. And about 30 of them I have a really good track on. And then the other ones missed their mark by a couple months. I personally, I know what the code states, that I need to give them one warning at the beginning of the year. They get that one warning this year, mid-April, end of April. They know that their responsibility as a property owner is to maintain their weeds. Every time I come upon that property that is not compliant, my intention this year is to issue that citation so that they can fully understand why it's important that we are keeping those weeds down on that property. Now I plan on doing that abatement by, yes, as Trevor had mentioned, by me contacting and getting bids to be able to do those abatements. The easier process to what I found out is through other experience in other communities is to have contracted companies that staff council has already agreed upon a price range for them to spend so many hours on a property, they get paid this much. If they're doing this activity, they get paid this much. And it runs into a more simplified process that when we are ready for abatement, I send the letter to Trevor, Trevor sends it to Dave, and it's approved. And you're ready to move forward with the abatement going to that contractor. It simplifies the process so much more. Now, when we're talking about towing of vehicles off of properties that are classified as unoperable and not licensed, which is required, they can be towed. We have been pretty relaxed in this, even though there has been several properties that have brought things up. Most of the time, the newer complaints on that seem to get fixed easier. It's the older residents of the community that I'm running into a difficult time getting these vehicles off of the properties. My personal like on that would be to contract with a tow company, and whether that contracted tow company will do it for whatever price to the city, it's just so much easier to be able to make that abatement come true. I've tried to get people to donate their vehicles to the fire department for them to do training. You can only do that so many times. But different things like that to try to make it so the community member, property owner is, hey, they want to be able to help, instead of me just going in there and being a dictator and saying it's got to change. We're running out of that space though, and we do need to come up with a plan, whether that is contracting with a tow company, which will be a lot cheaper for the city than for me just to say, I've now deemed that this vehicle is unlicensed and inoperable, and we move to that abatement process. It's much cheaper to have a contracted tow company to be able to come out and do that. So in my experience, and I work with it daily now. So one other thing I wanted to come up with, some of my big issues, and Trevor knows them. Every single day I hit that park and ride. Every single day I put an orange notification on a window up there, whether it's a motor home and we're working on plans to restripe that to get it more organized. That's the first thing people see when they come into our community. Organization would be key instead of having it like it is. But the reason I like to hit it there is because of trafficking, human trafficking, and that. If they see code enforcement up there and they're leaving notifications, it diminishes the risk of that, just like Officer Pope was up here speaking about. Other things that I'm doing is during the winter parking ordinance, go drive around town and see if you see a sticker in their window. look for those orange stickers and you'll find out if I'm doing my job or not. Just to let you know, those stickers get put on at about 5:30 in the morning. I'm just going to be flat out honest with you, because by the time I go to work at a different place, I've got to be able to meet what's enforceable by me, because if I'm afternoon, I can't enforce the code. I really think that my hours play a presence to the community. I really think it plays a benefit to them. So I would encourage you to look at that and be able to find a way to make that communication that we can enforce that winter code parking ordinance through code enforcement or through the Davis County prosecutor, one of the two, because that is my number one absolute complaint during the winter, and it does need to get taken care of. So for the safety of our tow operators and city liability, and honestly, anybody that travels on the streets. So thank you. And anytime anybody ever wants to chat, Trevor knows I respond. It doesn't matter what time it is. He knows that I respond. So thank you all. Any questions?
So I have a question. Might be a silly question. I don't know if it's for you, Chris, or for who it's for. But let's just say that Chris goes to a park one day and sees the same 15 people with the dogs and decides to issue $1,100 citations to those. Where does that money go? Just, I know as far as revenue, where does it just come to the general fund, or how does that work?
Yeah, that just becomes a line item of fine revenue that we have.
Okay.
General fund.
It's a
And
general
then it
fund
can
item,
just
yeah.
go to the storm drain? We can just-
She's trying to think about storm.
Not
drain.
quite, not quite.
No.
So I have a question. So if we do say we abate and you have to tow a truck or a car, whatever it is, how are we recouping that money? Is it collected when they go to get the car out of impound? I mean, I can see, so you go to you park and ride and you're towing people who don't live here in our city most of the time. And so how is that recouped?
Well, I can tell you the process. I can't tell you how it's recouped. But what I would do for the process is I'd place a notification on that vehicle that it will be impounded within 7 days. And then I call a tow truck out and they could tow it. That, in another community, there's a contracted tow company that tows it for free. And then they go after the property owner of that vehicle to recoup the cost. If that cost does not get recouped or that vehicle does not become collected, then they sell it.
Well, and that's what I was saying. If we don't have a contracted and an agreement set up to where either they collect the tow fine and also our fine, or whatever that arrangement is, you're out of that, especially if we're having to pay for that to be towed
So
versus.
yeah, so the fine would be assessed to the I would say perpetrator, I guess, the violator, and we can also assess the abatement cost for that. Now, whether or not that gets collected or not,
Well, the only way you would collect that is if it's collected by the tow company. You wouldn't, we'd have no way to collect that if it's someone that's not in our city or someone, that's the only way you would have it in that situation.
Yeah, for the towing situation, that's the best way
Yeah.
to go. Ultimately, I think the question is, if we don't have somebody who's compliant and who's going to repay us for the abatement cost, then we have an ability to put liens on their property.
Only on the property. So that would be, I just want everybody to understand that. That's why I'm asking the question.
It does become, the abatement issue is, you almost have to ask yourself the question,
worth it?
are we willing to put
Right.
city money into cleaning up those types of issues?
Sure.
Agreed.
Because the expectation for recovery of those funds is
Well, and
low.
that's what I could look, to go mow their weeds or their grass, and then you're sending the guy who probably doesn't have the money anyway, a bill for the $500 to bring in the landscape company. And then we put a lien on the prop. You'll never see that money back for I mean, it's a drawn out process. And so I can see us spending a whole lot of money mowing weeds.
So I will say, I've had previous experience with a city that's changed to a civil code enforcement process from a criminal. They issue about 1,500 notice of violations a year. 93% come into compliance before the cure period is up. And then between the other 7%, about 4% have the fees assessed, either that's by putting a lien or it gets collected. And then the 3% go through the appeals process. So it's really helped come into compliance that up front. And a lot of it, I mean, it allows us to make not a huge deal out of trying to, like, we're not going to send you to court. Just mow your lawn and tell us when it's done, and we'll call it good.
So I feel like when we brought this up in code committee, you know, a lot of it is we have these rules or these enforcements with no teeth behind them. And so it really came down to a question of, you know, how can we work with these repeat problems that we're continually having, that we're continually getting complaints about, while offering flexibility. You know, we talked about giving it a fixed fine or a fixed citation, but then we wouldn't be able to take into consideration the situation, which is why you're seeing that big jump, at least as I remember the conversation going. But it really just allows us to, if we're going to make rules, we need to be able to enforce those rules. If we're not going to enforce them, then they're just going to be broken. So this is kind of what the intention was to be able to give us the ability to actually enforce, especially ones that are repeat problems, because they know they're going to get a warning. But it's probably not going to go any further than that currently as it is, because we just don't have the power. And they, you know, we know that a judge is probably going to dismiss it. So this allows us to enforce those problems that are area with the flexibility of given the circumstances of each specific person and their situation.
Yeah. And it does allow the appeal authority to have some flexibility as well, right? So, and we have a little bit more control over that process on hearing the complaints and saying, you know, I really can't afford the $2,000 you just charged me. And we can talk to them about that at that point, right? We have the flexibility with, it's something that's within our control versus going to the court system. And that's a gamble. I mean, we could keep the court system and it's fine, but it just a lot of times just ends with with that process, and there's not anything to it after that.
One of the things that I personally like about the way this code is drafted and what the intent is to hand the city and create code that allows not just flexibility, but a toolbox. Right now, it feels like we have one screwdriver and that fits for certain circumstances, but for the majority of circumstances, we just don't have the right tool in our hand. And it's not that we're going to use every tool every time, but it allows that we can pick the tool that's appropriate for the circumstances.
I think one thing that's important with the council too is to let us know what the priority items to look for. Because I could tell Chris any number of codes and say, go measure all the trees and give out notice of violations for the trees, right? But that may not be a big issue to the council. And so it also allows us to, I mean, as he's going out and looking for this primary violations, he's also looking for the other violations along with it, but it helps us frame it, like what portions of the code, not what ones are we going to enforce and what ones aren't we going to enforce, but which ones are we looking for? What proactive approach are we going to be doing? Because there's going to be a reactive portion, but we want, and what I've heard is we want to move more into proactivity, where we're catching it earlier, where it's easier to say, hey, don't leave your tires on the side of your house. It's a slippery slope, and all of a sudden your bed's going to be out there too. Like, like we want to catch those early. They're easy enough to do. But I will say at the same time, when you become more proactive, the pendulum swings on the complaints that you get. Right now it's complaints that nothing's happening. And then it might be a complaint that, whoa, I just got a citation for X, and what in the world? And so just be ready for that if that's the trajectory we go.
The very first night that I heard complaints about the most recent STR. I was out there at midnight. The very first notice went out at midnight. We have that problem solved within 2 months. Within 2 months. Think about the process of that ordinance. Getting a code issue fixed within 2 months, believe it or not, is relative, it's almost unheard of, unless it's something that you can abate. There was a little bit of loss of communication with the property owner, and I know that there was some complaints. I tried to keep everybody up on those complaints. But overall, 2 months, having an inspection done, fire marshal inspection done, and bringing that to a public forum here in the next little bit, I think shows that the ordinance that we did draft has teeth, and it did work. Maybe a couple tweaks, but it did work, and that's to me an ordinance worth having. So kudos.
So my comments, I think it's great. We have a gap, we need something, we can tweak it. It gives us some flexibility with the appeal authority and other things. So I'm fine with moving forward as proposed, but as we learn things, let's definitely revise and improve it.
I have 2 comments. One, this will come up in our budget meetings here shortly, I'm sure, but what is the proposed budget to start with for this abatement? Does anyone have an idea?
We have not talked about that specific number yet.
Okay. Second, if someone could just help me on page 346 of the packet, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the policy or the code, however it's written here. So it says, section B, city manager shall act as the appeal authority unless it's appointed by the city manager. So does that mean the city manager is defaulted the appeal authority and then they can then delegate that to someone else?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So then code F, if you go down to F, it says the appeal authority position is not a supervisory position. It is supervised by the city manager or designee. So it kind of contradicts that it is the city manager in section B. Or am I reading that incorrectly?
What is meant by it's not a supervisory position? Does that mean we're just not going to have an appeals authority team? And it's just to be an individual, or?
Looking to Jamie because he wrote it.
I'm trying to find the specific language, but I think I'm a little bit beyond that.
It just feels like a chicken and the egg, cart before the horse. Let's think of something else. Is he the authority or is he not? And who, where does it start?
Before the horse.
The chicken before the horse.
Well, thank you.
Is that what she said?
Now I just,
No.
It's not even, we're not even close to done yet either.
nobody's listened to her hard enough, I guess.
Like the name.
This is written to have the city manager as the appeal authority, but it could be changed to be, I think the other option, if it were a single individual, would be, well, let me back up a little bit. It's challenging in South Weaver because you have a very flat city organization. And so Trevor will be involved in some of the day-to-day choices of enforcement, and David may even be involved in some of those choices. And so it is, I think if you were to do it, you would, and have it be an employee, it would have to be David, and then you would have to create some separation between who makes decisions on which things to enforce, so that David is independent if you were to do it. The other way to do it would be to contract for the position, much like you do the land use appeal authority, and have it be a single contracted individual who would hold those hearings and make those decisions. But this is written for the city manager. It would have to be changed if you go the other direction.
So you're saying section
Mhm.
B or F would be changed?
Well, B would be changed because it lists the city manager, and then you would probably remove C You know, if you decide to have the appeal authority be a contract position, then you would strip out the merit volunteer and just call it a contract position.
Okay.
And I don't think they would be subject to personnel rules if they're a contract employee, or not employee, but a contracted service.
So who do we want the appeal authority to be, I guess is what we need to decide, because we talked about having it contracted out, having it be Dave. Is it possible to have it contracted out when it goes over a certain amount in the citation? So that Dave could handle lesser citation values, and anything that would be a more significant amount could go to a different appeal authority?
As long as you delineate what it is and have a clear process, I'm okay with that. There are two concerns. One is consistent application of the code to individuals. And so if you can achieve that or near to that, I think you're okay. And then the other concern is simply due process. That if you have to go to court to enforce a violation, or somebody goes to court to try to prevent enforcement of a violation, we need to establish that they had a right to be heard, the right to be represented by counsel, and that they had adequate notice of that hearing.
I actually feel fairly strongly about this point.
Good.
And that is, if you remember when the city council had to act as an appeal authority, we still had our contracted appeal authority walk us through the process so that we did it properly. It feels like we would be paying somebody, even if it was me, we would require some assistance, because that's not the expertise area. And so I think it would make more sense. Again, to Jamie's point, the whole idea is that as city staff, we are going through the process, giving the notice, giving the violation, doing all of that, and they are appealing our work as city staff. And so I feel strongly that that appeal authority, who's an attorney who knows the law, who knows due process, who can walk through those steps, can hear it separate and distinct from the action the city,
right,
whether that's staff or council or whoever, the city has already taken that step of we're giving the notice, we're giving the citation, we're going through this, and they're appealing our actions. And so having that outside entity, I think, is an importance. And
Yeah, it seems a little weird to have the city give you a citation and then you appeal to the city of the citation they gave you.
Unless we are specifically designating a separation here between our community services department and who is giving those citations versus the city manager position. And I think we've already discussed where there's an overlap there as far as an abatement process because of the procurement side of that and those thresholds. So I feel like I'm already involved in the giving of the violation notice and the citation, whether directly or indirectly.
We had for example, in previous city, they had the police chief act as the appeal authority because the code enforcement officer didn't report to him, he reported to a different department, and so those violations didn't go through.
Sergeant Pope it is.
So
Dragging me.
that was also selected because they're familiar with the due process, so they're familiar with all of the requirements for that. And so
I just hate seeing it, if it's a small appeal, seeing us, I mean, if it's I hate seeing us spend no offense, Jamie, on an expensive attorney. It would be, it just seems trivial if we're appealing.
Yeah, it does not need to be an attorney, and you may find contract appeal officers that would be non-attorneys that could do it at a different rate. As Trevor mentioned, it can be staff, it could be a police officer, it could be anybody you think would be fair in their decision making. They're really just reviewing the action to make sure that it complied with the code and that it happened that way. And then I should clarify, I don't know if you have this question, but it could not be me or anyone in my law firm, because I would be advising the city on compliance as they issue citations or things like that, to the extent issues will come up. And so there would be a conflict there. So there's.
I'm also very excited that Dave can't give it to me.
Sounded like Trevor suggested the Clearfield Police Chief, but
Well, there you go. I didn't
we
say the entity,
we
but
could
thank
have our
you.
own fire chief or, something like that.
Recreation director. Give it to Curtis.
Well, one aspect of this that we haven't talked about is who can issue the citation and the notice of
Mhm.
violation. We are expanding that authority in this document as well.
We did.
And so not just resides with the quote unquote deputized code enforcement officer. It allows other officers of the city to give those notice of violation. So with that lens as well, it feels inappropriate for me, who has the ability to give a citation, also be an appeal authority in the same
That was
process.
kind of a solution to having a part-time, when we talked about this before, having a part-time code enforcement and going to a full-time code enforcement officer. This is one solution, was to allow more people that ability.
And that included like the fire chief and.
It would be department heads, the city manager, and the mayor, and the code enforcement officer.
Roger hit a minute to make a lot of friends.
Just
All
keeps
the
getting
city
better and
councils have
better.
to do it together, and that's just complicated.
Apparently not.
Guess it's gonna be
I
you,
don't
Blair.
know the solution to that, but
Perhaps it might be just in the code, giving it to the city manager or somebody that he appoints, and it just, or they appoint, and then it just allows that kind of natural ability for us to determine internally the administration of it.
But isn't that what I just said? We can't do? Yeah. Can we just ask the code committee to review all of
No.
page 346 of the packet?
Oh,
I think Jamie, just to clarify, she's concerned about the line F on being kind of superfluous because it talks in circles.
And line E says they shall be trained and knowledgeable in city code, due process, rules of evidence, civil procedure, administrative and procedure, nuisance law, zoning law. So that lends it to sound like it is an attorney that we're contracting with.
The conversation that we had in code committee was exactly that. And this language doesn't quite match up with what we were
That's-
presenting.
Okay, that's why I said if we could
Yes.
just go review this again.
well, is that what the council wants, is for it to go to a
That's what
appeal
this
authority?
council wants.
Is it needed in code committee, or is it something that staff can update? and
I
bring
think it's
back?
something staff can update, but we needed direction from the council as far as if that is something you want an appeal authority to take over. Do you want the city manager out of it and the mayor and department heads and Chris out of the appeal authority?
When I read through it, I thought having the city manager be the default one, but then I thought there was language in here that allows him to, delegate it to someone else. And so if it gets to a point where it's something he feels, maybe there's a conflict of him being the one, then he can identify somebody at that time. I think it's hard to, back to what Blair was saying, hard to, identify everything right now. I don't want to make sure every single appeal goes to some formally trained, individual. But if it's a more complicated one, then at that point, Dave can, if he's the one, can say, this one needs to be, appointed or delegated to, and then you'd identify somebody at that point.
I think that it will lend itself naturally to the moments of when I could handle that, or a city manager could handle that, or if I'm involved in the process of the citation or whatnot, then makes it clear when we would need to hand that off to somebody else.
Is that defensible though, Jamie, if we, because then that makes it his judgment. And so someone could then claim that they were not fairly treated because the city manager arbitrarily decided to, have a different appeal authority.
I think as long as you establish some kind of written policy, even if it's David's own written memo saying these are the matters I will handle and these are the matters somebody else will handle. I think when Chris goes out to do enforcement of vehicles, weeds, those kinds of things. I don't think he's consulting with David. I think he's just given kind of, these are the types of things we want you to handle. And so I don't perceive any kind of conflict or issue in doing that. If you had a larger abatement issue, you know, if it were like we had with Cobblestone, you know, where the city manager would be involved and would have to make some decisions, then it would make sense for David maybe to hire somebody or have someone available to act as the appeal authority in those circumstances.
So is there a way to write that?
Yeah.
Stands? How does council feel about that option?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Could I ask when staff does change that, if we could have these kind of side by side so we can have this reference in the new packet as well?
Sure.
Thank you.
And just to make sure I understand properly, I think the way I would write this is that the code would require the city manager to either act as the appeal authority or within a written policy assign that to somebody else. And the code wouldn't delineate what that policy is. And then he would have the flexibility with your advice on how to create that and what to include.
Yes.
So I just had one other clarification question. If it goes to the appeal authority, let's say it's Dave, he makes his decision, is there another appeal authority that's identified? I mean, it didn't seem like it, but in.
No, not in your code. It would be judicial review. So state law does allow for judicial review of these. Yeah. And
So
it's,
just reverse the
I
state
should
law.
clarify, state law, the judicial review, it goes to district court, but it's an appellate review. It's not de novo. They're just looking at it to see whether they were afforded due process and whether you adhere to the requirements of what has to be in the notice of violation. And then beyond that, the court doesn't intervene or substitute its judgment for that of the city.
Thank you. So if we're done with that one, I've got another one. So if not, that's why I've just been sitting here quietly nodding my head. First of all, I have a hard time with this whole subject. I know it's needed and I know it's necessary, but at the same time, I'm one of those property rights fanatics that, but, and I guess that takes me to on 341 C, authority to inspect. A code enforcement officer is authorized to enter upon any property or premises to ascertain whether the provisions of the city code or city ordinances are being obeyed. So he can trespass anywhere he wants. He can go onto any property. He can come into my backyard. Is that what it's saying? I don't understand.
That is not giving me permission to trespass at all.
Okay.
I can view it.
Will you come to the mic?
Yeah, Mike.
You come to the mic.
Yeah, that does not give a code enforcement official a legal right to trespass in any means. What it does give me a right to, just like anybody else, would be for me to obtain information, evidence from a legally accessed area to be able to pursue the case, begin the investigation, and move forward with a case. So that's what it does.
So why doesn't it say that instead of this?
Maybe a little antiquated. That's a good word, right?
Joel, will you point me to the section you're?
Yeah, it's C, authority to inspect under.
Page 341. So would an example of this, Chris, be,
It's
say
under-
that you have a resident that is complaining of their neighbor's animals that they have, and you're able to enter their property to see the animals in the backyard of the
With
complainant,
yes.
with their permission?
Yeah, with their permission, yes.
It has to be something that was a city code.
Yep.
So we don't have any city codes of entering somebody's home outside of our fire inspection. So
I mean,
that
there-
one, it would
yeah.
be something that he could enter into a home because it's city code enforcement.
I mean, even property. I mean, I worry for you, walking in back of some of people's property. I mean, that's kind of a scary. So that's legit. This is.
Yeah,
It's not,
I don't think, sorry, I mean, I think this is just us giving him the authority to do it legally with permission.
Okay.
Right now, I think that's what Haley was just saying is, we're just finally putting it in that we're authorizing him to do it if he's allowed to do it. Maybe we could add a little bit to that to say that, but I mean, I don't know how, I don't think this is saying no matter what the circumstances is, he can go walk in someone's front door.
No,
Yeah.
correct. This is consistent with the code in other cities, but you know, as with anything, you're the legislative body, and so if there are things you would like clarified, added to, removed, you know, we can do that. Subparagraph 2 under paragraph C, the very last sentence does make clear that, you know, Fourth Amendment applies, search and seizure rules apply.
Okay.
He wouldn't be authorized to go into somebody's home if not permitted by them to enter their home without a search warrant or other judicial order. And I don't think Chris would be the one authorized to do that. It would have to be a licensed peace officer.
Okay.
But if there were things that were visible in somebody's yard, I'm thinking of like weed abatement.
Yeah.
Vehicles left around, waste. I think he'd be authorized to go in and assess that and see what it is.
Chris, can you clarify just the process there and this idea of entering property? My understanding is that not just you, but code enforcement officers in general don't enter property to ascertain whether there's a violation. You do that from the road or from the sidewalk, from a public area, unless there is right given or authorization given to enter property.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, it's even, I won't take a picture over a fence. If I'm going to take a picture over a fence, that fence is included in my photo because it's not legal for me to climb a ladder and look over into somebody's property, no different than you can as a citizen. I can't. So there's different aspects like that are important, but yeah, Dave hit it spot on. I will use legal access right of ways to be able to gain access to do my photo documentation.
Well, I'll say this, you were asking for kind of a preference. I'm great with businesses. I'm great with, especially, somebody who's not operating under license or, rental, any short-term, those kind of things I'm really good with. I just have a own personal problem with weeds, and those kind of things. So but I understand why the city needs to do it. But yeah, it's hard for me, I'll admit. But yeah, that was the only real question I had was just making sure that it wasn't superseding any other type of trespass. So
I think a good reasonable expectation for weeds is when it becomes a fire hazard, when it becomes a public issue, that is when that needs to be addressed. And that's kind of when it's taken away from the property owner to be able to make that assessment. It can be a fine line, and I understand that, but there does come a point where it's a public safety hazard.
And that's good too. I remember last year, I think there was a developer, a builder or something like that, who had a 4-foot tall weed. Yeah, I mean, so to me, it automatically went to all of the weeds that I have in my front yard or backyard or any of these kind of things. And it's just like, I have a hard time government getting involved into everything. So I
understand. Yep.
I think it's important that there's still discretion allowed to the code enforcement officer, right? To have that conversation. I don't think we're not going to issue Chris special boots that have a 6-foot high mark on the bottom so that we can make sure that he can just stand right next to the grass and see if it's tight enough. That seems a little excessive. That has happened. I know that has happened. I've seen where there's a special stick that measures trees, and we're not gonna special order equipment so that he can catch violators. I think what it does is, like Dave said, it opens up the doors for us to have better conversations and better enforcement and better compliance. Because yeah, I think that's with all of us. One of the things that triggers code enforcement, we were talking about this one time, is you're driving down the street, you know you're speeding, a police officer catches you, you kind of go like, this is annoying, but I know what I did wrong. It was wrong. Code enforcement often feels quite the opposite because you're at the safety of your home, you're living your life, you're doing what you're doing, you don't think anything's amiss, and all of a sudden you get this notice of violation in the mail. And it's like, what in the world? And so that's kind of the trigger of like, I'm not like so-and-so across the street, go get them. And what this allows us to do is a fair application of we have the same process, we do the same things. It's a really easy fix. You have 10 days to do it. We won't assess any fees if you do it, and we'll all walk away happy. And I think that's the goal resolution. We're not padding our pockets. We're not looking to increase the revenue to offset any storm drain issues. We're looking to just have compliance there. I know we all feel the same way there.
Are you finished?
Are you finished?
Okay, next one, let's quickly, Dave, go through the legislative review, what's been going on down south from here.
Okay, I'll try to do this very briefly. The Legislative Policy Committee on Monday was another big meeting. They went over a whole bunch of bills that are in front of the legislature right now. Under housing and land use, under economic development, under municipal power, under public safety and retirement benefits, and then a litany of other things like eminent domain, about budget transparency, open and public meeting acts, violations, electric bicycle definitions, all kinds of things. So I won't bore you with any of the specifics, other than there was a heads up that they anticipate some action alerts coming out. We have yet to see Utah League of Cities and Towns action alerts through this session. An action alert is essentially, this is the moment when the league as a body, meaning the collection of mayors and city councilors, city council members, and city managers throughout the state, to reach out personally to our individual legislators and talk to them about how the bills affect us. And so the league tracks all these things, they monitor all these things, they give updates in emails and these meetings where we have a chance to influence whether the league opposes or supports or is neutral on bills. And then these action alerts come out. And those are the moments when they are requesting us to reach out with a phone call, with a text. Usually emails get lost. And so more personal conversation or communication with our legislators. And so they recommended, or they said, please watch for the action alerts that they expect to be forthcoming. When they provide those action alerts, they also provide talking points and kind of the perspective of the cities and the Legislative Policy Committee, the board for the league, so that we'll have those in our back pocket. One of the things that they've reiterated for all of us is that we talk about kind of holding elected officials accountable. And I know you feel that from our residents, and I feel that from our residents. When it comes to state legislators, their constituents are the same as ours. And they do listen to city council members and mayors, and that those relationships matter when it comes to affecting policy decisions at the state. So lots of things happening, and yet the real heavy action, they say, will be forthcoming. So if you do have questions about specific bills, I'm happy to entertain that or answer any questions that may or may not have been discussed at LPC.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next item is a training session, part of our retreat, and we've got Jamie here. He's going to handle this and do some training for us, so I'll turn the time to Jamie.
Can we have a 5-minute break? Is that possible? Yeah.
Sure, I'm good with that. Anything
Aye.
else?
Oh, look at that. Trevor just made it so everybody can.
It's not backwards.
Only been doing this
Sometimes I forget my name, I can't read it. It's like, no, that's my name.
What's my name again?
We can have it right here.
All right, Jamie's ready.
Are we ready?
Okay, yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, roll up your sleeves. We're gonna do an hour's worth of training in about 10 minutes.
Good deal.
And then if we'll test how well I really know this stuff because I'm gonna do it without the slides and we'll just condense it down. 3 topics we needed to talk about: Open and Public Meetings Act, a little bit of roles and responsibilities, and then ethics. To tick the box on open and public meetings, the basic requirement is anytime you have a quorum of the council gathered together and you're talking about things that relate to council business, it is a meeting. And whether that gathering is in person or online or on the same email thread or chat or text message string, that is considered a meeting. And so you do need to be mindful of that. There have been some examples in the news over the past year or two. The thing I see happening more and more often now are Facebook strings or Facebook chat messages in groups where you won't realize that on a thread of 100 different messages, there may be 3 or more members of the city council commenting on a topic, and that in certain circumstances can be considered a meeting and is something to be careful of, just to make sure that you don't run afoul of the Open and Public Meetings Act and its requirements. There are exceptions, of course, if it's a social gathering or something like that where you're not conducting city business, then those types of things are okay. Meetings have to be noticed, they have to be recorded. There are only certain circumstances when you can go into closed session and not have the public present when you're considering city business, but no action can be taken during those closed sessions. The most frequent for you all will be when you're discussing real estate transactions, when you're discussing personnel decisions, and when you're talking about litigation matters. The language in the statute's a little more precise than that, but those are the general categories where those exceptions would apply. Any questions about Open and Public Meetings Act? Okay. You will have this training in all the different public bodies that you're a part of, and I trust that as you go through that, you'll get a full and complete picture of the Open and Public Meetings Act, and we'll touch on it a little more next year. I will have Trevor and Lisa forward to you as part of the meeting minutes, 3 presentations, 1 on open and public meetings, 1 on roles and responsibilities on land use decisions, and then 1 on ethics. The ethics one is fun if you want to click through it. David asked me if I was going to use a baseball analogy again this year. I didn't. I used a surfing analogy, and it has some fun content, but the thrust of it is this. When David Church, who used to represent the League of Cities and Towns, would give his training to newly elected officials, he would open it with a line that I love. And it's, congratulations, now that you're elected to public office, you qualify to commit 12 felonies that you didn't qualify to commit before. And as you read through the ethics law, you'll see listed a few of those different offenses that you now qualify for. And we've had some good discussion today about ethics, but I would encourage you to read through the presentation. I highlight 6 different types of waves you have to be prepared to navigate. And I'm going to get them wrong if I try to say them all off hand, but it really relates to any time your personal economic interest is affected by a decision or by information that you receive through your public responsibilities and duties with the city. Those have to be disclosed. There are certain types of conflicts of interest where disclosure is required within certain timeframes and in a particular format. And I would just encourage you, anytime you suspect that there may be a conflict of interest between your economic interests or that of your family members, business associates, or relatives, please give me a call or give Mayor Westbrook a call and discuss what types of disclosure might be needed for that conflict and how it ought to be addressed. When you surf smaller waves, you can get away with a single leash between your ankle and the surfboard that you're riding, because the waves aren't big enough to break that leash free. And even if they did, the water's not deep enough for it to be of any real significant consequence. You just have to go chase your board, but you would be fine. When you surf deeper water, you wear 2 leashes. That way, if the force of the water detaches you from your board and you lose one of the leashes, you still have one attached and you can find the surface. Because if you lose your board in deep water, you're in real trouble. It's not just going to chase your board, but it can affect you and your health and your well-being. And I kind of view the mayor and the city attorney as your 2 leashes that you wear in an ethics context, and that you have 2 places you can go to if you have those kinds of questions to raise them, and then to make sure that you're protected and that they're handled appropriately. And so we both will be available to help with those types of issues. Let's shift to roles and responsibilities. Most of the council, we did a lengthy presentation about a year ago on land use roles and responsibilities. Just to summarize, you wear a few different hats as a city council when you're making land use decisions. You will make certain decisions that are enacting land use regulations. Those are things like zoning ordinances, certain types of development agreements, text amendments to the zoning ordinance, new zoning maps, general plan amendments. Anytime you're making those types of decisions, you're functioning in a legislative capacity. When you're functioning in a legislative capacity, you can consider anything that is, quote, reasonably debatable. And as long as it's reasonably debatable, a court will not intervene and overturn your decision. I should say the one other qualification is that it's consistent with the authority given you under state law. And there are a few things, there are areas where that's given and areas where that's taken away. But generally, when you're making those decisions, you can apply your own preferences, your own expertise, you can weigh public opinion, you can consider whether the neighbors like it when you're making that type of a choice. There are other land use decisions you'll make where you're making a decision as a land use authority, not a land use regulation. Those are things like site plan approvals, the approval of a development agreement where it's consistent with city code. You're just making plans for sequencing of construction, where and when the public amenities would be built, the application of city funds for certain portions of the project. Those would all be administrative choices. When you're making an administrative choice, you're a lot more limited in what you can consider, and your decisions have to be supported by substantial evidence in order for a court to uphold the decisions that you make. That means in those kinds of circumstances, even if there's public clamor or you don't like a project, you can't apply that criteria to your decision. You have to look at what the constraints are within the land use law and then the project in front of you and compare the two. You can gather information to understand how and whether the proposed land use decision complies with the law, but you have to apply the law itself, not your own preferences, to those kinds of choices. Trevor and David do a great job when they put materials before you at the beginning of the material saying this is a legislative decision, this is an administrative decision, and then characterize what the decision is. I would just remind you that when you see those words, I hope a light bulb goes off in your head and you say, oh, okay, this is a legislative decision. I can consider a much more broad criteria. I can make a policy-based decision. If I don't like it for any reason that's debatable, I can apply that and that can affect how I vote. When you see an administrative decision, then it should be okay. I have to understand what the code requirements are and then what the evidence is before me. And if it's not in the record or supported by some kind of evidence, it can't be used to support your decision. In conclusion, there's a little bit of overlap between the Open Meetings Act requirements, the ethics requirements, and these land use decisions. And it's basically this, that when it is appropriate for you to do things like site visits on your own or with one other council member to observe a property, gather evidence, or things that you would consider when making a decision, but you do have to be careful in those contexts that it's not the full council and that you're not having discussions with the full council. And then similarly, you can weigh neighborhood input, resident input, public clamor when you're making your decision, but you have to do it and receive that information in such a way that it doesn't become tantamount to a meeting where you have more than one member of the council present. And I will leave those as the high points. If there are any particular questions you have, I'm happy to field them now or field them at a later time. And I'll leave with you the presentations that have the citations and all of the things that back up what I just discussed. Trevor, was there, or David, was there anything else you wanted me to cover on those topics?
No, I'm just excited to learn more about your waves.
Okay. On the second or third slide, you can click through to a YouTube video that's about these crazy Australian guys that surf waves in the coast of Portugal, and it's worth a watch. But the crux of it is there are two rules in big wave surfing. The first rule is ride the biggest waves you can, and the second rule is live to ride them tomorrow. And I think a similar rule applies when you're on a city council, that you want to make the best decisions you can for the city, but you also want to live to make those decisions tomorrow and throughout the course of the term.
So Jenny, are you a surfer?
No, I'm a terrible surfer. But I took a trip with my family to Portugal last fall, and they have just off the coast of Portugal the biggest waves that have been ridden. And so I just, as a curiosity, went to go see kind of that location. But yeah, I can throw a baseball and shoot a basketball and do things that have no practical value whatsoever, but I'm not a very good surfer at all.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. We appreciate
Very
you.
good.
We appreciate you
Yeah.
being our attorney. Thanks so much. Okay, reports. Anyone have any new business that they would like to discuss in council? Okay. Okay, then we'll have council and staff reports. Anyone have any report? Any items that they would like to bring up?
First, just a question. Who controls the heat in this place?
I do.
Do you?
Yep.
Sorry.
Blair, sorry.
That's me.
We assigned that to Blair a long time ago.
You just have to look down and tell me to point at it and we'll turn it
We've
on.
got the two cooling units is also.
I feel you.
Tell you.
I was just feeling so nice and warm. I guess I should have known that it was not to be.
I don't think I have any.
Andy?
Mayor, I just have one item to report. From Municipal Utilities Committee, we met last week and discussed our contract with CRSA. We will have further discussion about the Public Works building and that architectural design. And also the Municipal Utilities Committee will meet shortly to discuss our storm drain rate study, get a new analysis going. So that's
Okay.
all I have to report.
Okay.
Joel, if I can talk about the bike track, just an update there, or do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so we do have a number of citizens that have been helping and getting materials so that we could have a bike track down at the Canyon Meadows Park. And that is starting up again. We've already started to get more material deposited. Talked to Mark Larson, and he's actually working with them to spray paint the ground to show exactly where we want the new dirt. And it's nice to see that moving already this early in the year. Luckily, it's been warm enough, and we've had the opportunity to get the dirt. So,
Who's providing that dirt? Who's Scott getting that from, do you know?
It's a resident over there that works for Granite Construction.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, Granite.
Yeah, their hope is to have the dirt bike track stuff essentially in place before we're able to come back and do the landscaping and the painting of the courts and whatnot.
The only other report is just dust still keeps blowing in the winter months, so.
Sometimes worse.
We had a comment by one of the gravel pit members thinking that, the winter, usually it dies down, is not big of an issue, but if you don't have snow or rain and it's dry and it's cold, so they can't put any water on it, we've seen, unfortunately, a couple of weeks of higher than expected, higher than normal dust blowing through, and we're working with them. I send them a weekly update on what we measure and what we see, and they, Geneva contacted me and said they're discussing internally to try to address some of the issues that we've identified.
Is Baker Parsons doing something on their northwest side as far as
Right.
hydro seeding, or what are they doing over there?
Yeah, they have kind of completed that area, then they've been building it up, and at the beginning of the summer, it was really bad while they're doing a lot of work there, but yeah, they've kind of finishing it now, so they've hydroseeded or kind of revegetated that
Cool.
area.
Great.
While they were getting it down, though, it was kicking up some dust, but hopefully long-term, that'll get some vegetation and significantly reduce from at least the north side.
They were talking about seeding that in the spring, so I was happy to see that they went ahead and seeded that now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So come spring, it should take hold. It'll be good.
unless we don't get any water.
Right, if we don't get any water, then it's gonna be worse. That's all I had, Mayor.
Okay, thanks, Quinn. You're doing an excellent job. We appreciate all that you're doing there. That's a lot of good work, and I think bringing it to their attention and them seeing how active we are, it's got to be like a thorn in their side. So
Yeah.
I think that's good. Yeah.
So PR hasn't met this year. We were just waiting for the retreat and when we can have our committee meetings regarding kind of the goals that we have. But I did want to just mention Country Fair Days is getting ready to plan, and Tawny has still not found any other chairs. So if there's anybody that you know of that would be willing to help, she's really in need of another chair or two, ideally. So please keep that in mind if you can think of anybody. And then just with the storm drain discussion, I'm not sure when PR will meet, but, and maybe it should wait until after municipal utility, but this is probably something we're gonna wanna have on the website and something newsletter, something to get out to the residents. We're gonna wanna get in front of that so that they're aware of it. And then code committee met today. We updated our new members on what's going on. We have landscaping is going to planning commission. This is one thing that will allow members in the community to flip their strip and get the rebate. So we're hoping to get that one in and finalized very quickly, so those that want to take advantage of it can, and put some goals together for the council to review at our retreat. And one other thing, oh, put some end dates on some things that was with staff currently to get to planning commission or city council, wherever that is they need to go.
Thank you, Haley. Blair?
We met as the Public Safety Committee on the 18th and met with the Davis County Sheriff to continue discussions about our current sheriff's service. And I think it was a very good meeting, and hopefully we'll be reporting back soon with some more progress. But it was a very good meeting, and then the discussion continues. So I think that is all for me.
Okay. Thank you, Blair. A couple of items. I've been attending a lot of meetings. Man, have I been attending a lot of meetings. And about every meeting that I attend, I come out of there not feeling very good, because everybody that chairs their committees, and whether it's the Wasatch Integrated or the Weber Sewer District, everybody pretty much says things are going up. Don't like to hear that, but that's what all indications are, that prices are going to be going up, and we're going to see that here in the city. And one that really bothers me is one with the sewer district. They presented a plan in the sewer district where they're wanting, or it was proposed by the one of the Weber County Commissioners, going west of the river and putting in a whole new section of sewer that would be developed for industrial, a big industrial park plus residential housing. And if that goes through, there's going to be a large increase coming down the line, and hopefully we can maybe do something about that. I think it was bothering a lot of the mayors that were there. And so we'll see where that goes, but that's not too good right now. So other than that, that's something that might be aware of, might be coming down. the
When you
pipe.
say out west, where do you mean exactly?
It's way out west. They
Like West Weber, West Warren area?
It's down 12th Street. You go down 12th Street as far as you can go
That's my hometown.
until you hit the river. The sewer district doesn't go beyond the river. And they would like to see it be developed out there, and it would be a big development, and we would require 3 lift stations to bring the sewer back up to where the district is. And so hopefully, I don't know which way this is gonna go, but it could be a big increase. So just make you aware of that.
Mayor, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, why would that affect the whole rest of the county if it's mainly developers that want to develop that?
Well, that's
one
what
portion.
needs to be discussed and more will be said about that, I'm sure, in the next meetings, but yeah, you've got all of that, but they had, the county, the commissioner says that he could get some money allocated through the county for that, and they could use some, I think some ARPA money or something, but they're talking about a project that's, if I remember right, about $43 million project is what they're looking at out there.
It's not for another Amazon building, is it?
No, they didn't say who, but they said they had a large company that's as big as Kimberly Clark that's wanting it out there.
Wow.
So anyway, we'll see
Time to
how that
change it.
goes.
The only thing.
They're
Mayor,
up for reelection.
Yeah, they are. I did forget to report on planning commission, so I apologize. Just 2 quick items. There was a preliminary hearing and action item and planning commission and recommended approval for a rezone of a 34 lot subdivision that will be coming before council shortly, I'm assuming. Right? And that is located on what was known as the old Watts property. And so that should be in your packets. And then there was a couple other items that weren't the Dan Murray subdivision there, where there was going to be the Alpha Coffee. They did approve was that a
Sodalicious?
Site plan amendment.
Sodalicious type thing? It was just a changed site plan from before because it's something different. So anyway, that's it. I just forgot I had that.
Was the building basically the same as what they originally approved for Alpha Coffee? Or did they
No,
change the
it's-
whole?
It looks more like the other buildings now.
Oh,
A little
Slightly
different.
larger.
It's larger, but it actually, I think, has some good potential, but
Cool. Anything from staff?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been excited for a report as for tonight's report. So
No.
that's my expectation level right now for you. A couple of shout outs. One, shout out to the mayor. Did everybody notice the new can lights in
I
here?
was gonna
How
bring
bright
that
it
up.
is?
I was
Yeah.
wondering why it was so bright.
Because the mayor's leaving his mark. Also,
he changed them himself.
Yeah.
Came in over the
Saturday morning.
weekend and did it. I got a text early Saturday morning that said, look at this,
Look
it's
at
so
this,
bright
it's
in here.
awesome."
It's awesome. Also a huge shout out to Alicia and Mac. We got word today that we received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. So the work that Alicia did as an intern And now as the treasurer, working with Mac in all that we did to make that budget document more user-friendly, more informational, all of that received an award. And
It was
so
because of the pictures, huh?
and there was some
And there
photo
were some
credit in there
pictures.
for sure. So huge shout out to Mac and
That's
Alicia for that.
Good job.
Great, thank you.
Also, we got word today that we will get the BRIC grant. And so shout out to Wayne for his work and helping us get the pieces together on that. That's a really big deal for us. So BRIC is Building Resilient Infrastructure something in communities. It's the Emergency Management Planning Grant through FEMA. And so we now will be able to go through a process. We budgeted a certain amount this year to do that. There's a matching grant that we received. And so we'll be able to start that process and start putting together an all hazards mitigation plan. And it's a extended process. It's a months and months and months long process, but we'll be able to do that and receive that money, which the cool part about it is not only the planning to be able to identify what are the things we can do to mitigate hazards, but specifically what are the projects that would need to be done on our infrastructure that would mitigate hazards. And that is the threshold that's required to then be eligible for FEMA grant money to actually do those projects. So
awesome.
this is a big deal in opening the door to potentially accomplishing some major projects for emergency management. So Trevor's excited to handle that project.
I thought he was going to add, and one of the other things I'm really excited about is Trevor's.
We are prepared. The Admin Finance Committee worked on the audit RFP. We talked about that, and the audit just completed as the report last month. That should be published within the next few days. And so we're on track as everybody had wanted. So Mac and I are just finalizing that up tomorrow, and that should be published. The other thing that I am excited about is we have been looking for a while in how to kind of streamline some city processes and kind of complete this transition that we're in to create the two different departments, the Community Services Department and the Admin Finance Department. We've found a number of places that kind of rub during that. And so City Hall staff is working to kind of finalize that transition. And one of the biggest needs that we've identified over the last little bit, if you remember, we've always had essentially two front desk receptionists to handle calls and walk-ins and all of that kind of stuff. We transitioned away from that in some ways. I know Alicia sits up front, but we've transitioned away from that. And we've been able to find in current budget an ability to get another part-time person to help with all of the City Hall needs and staffing issues and coverage and things like that. So we're really excited to be able to hopefully publish out a job notice for an additional permanent part-time employee here at City Hall to kind of get back to staffing levels that we've had previously. But it's not a new budget request. It's something we've been able to handle. The question that we're trying to finalize is whether or not that will kick our internship program to the curb and we have to use that money. We found some money that we think can cover the cost there. If it's not quite enough, then we would transition that internship program and use that money to bridge that final piece to make it work. So the hope is that we can still keep the intern program and make this happen. If not, we'd rather meet the permanent need and the ongoing need rather than that just summertime help, although that has been a really important program for us, as evidenced by the budget award. So if you have questions about that, I didn't want anybody to be concerned or nervous or unaware when you see a job notice for City Hall staff that somebody's leaving or whatnot. It would be a new position that we've been able to find in current budget. And then the final thing is we get the weekly slides from the county health department on COVID numbers and things like that. They're fascinating as you watch those charts get created over time. But it stuck out to me today when I saw that, and it counts the number of weeks. And we just hit week 100 of dealing with this. However, on the call that we have once a month with them, the mayor and I, just this last phone call we had with them, they talked about essentially the numbers of cases has gone up dramatically, as you've seen. That's starting to come down a little bit this last 2 weeks. But that increased dramatically. However, the number of hospitalizations and the number of fatalities stayed fairly constant. And we asked the question directly, is that a sign that this is coming to an end? And he said, the health director basically said, well, don't get ahead of us too far, but for all intents and purposes, yes, is that those numbers are starting to show that there's still concern for some of the vulnerable population and whatnot. And so we're still going to have some things for a period of time. But I specifically asked the question, well, are we going to just treat this like a cold where you get sick and then you get better and then you get back going to life? And he said, we're pretty close to that. So I thought that was a positive sign from that conversation. So I know lots of different feelings are associated with
It's been a
COVID,
long
but
time.
the fact that we hit 100 weeks was a big number.
I remember when this first happened and I said, like, we'll be okay in like 6 weeks. And you said, I think we're in it for the long haul. And I said, I hope you're wrong. But 100 weeks later, you were right.
Thank you. It took 100 weeks, but.
It wasn't a compliment, David.
All right, that's fair. Yeah, that's my report.
Mayor, I
Dave.
do have one
Thank
quick
you,
thing.
everyone. We appreciate everyone being here
Oh.
tonight.
Other staff members might have
One
reports.
tiny-
Okay.
I just have
Trevor.
a list of 20
Trevor,
things
you've
I need
had
to
too
cover.
much time tonight already.
I know. We're best friends. I just want to let you know that we had a pre-construction meeting. We had 2 pre-construction meetings this week, or within the week. One for Sodalicious, so there's going to be some ground turning there. And then one for the lofts that was done today. So you'll start seeing some ground being turned over there. The first things they need to do, if they can do it in 6 weeks, or less, 4 weeks, I guess, is get the utilities underneath the Davis Weaver Canal before they start filling it up with water on the 15th. So they're going to be trying to book it March 15th. Sorry, March 15th. So they're going to be trying to book it to get that done. So you'll see some movement on the ground there, some ground turning over, and construction starting on that.
That was worth bringing up. Thank you, Trevor. Everyone
We get
should be
lots of
aware of
questions
that.
about it. So I just thought we'd
Yeah,
tell you.
that was good. That
beforehand.
was great. Okay, anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Mayor, I make a motion, we adjourn.
A second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.